Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable. See playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 3861, The Needle. The thunderous noise lasted for 3 days and 3 nights before it finally stopped. The entire chaos temporarily returned to a state of tranquility. Some of the creatures in the source world began to regain their senses of hearing. Even though the terrible shock waves already disappeared, the people did not feel relieved. Instead, they became even more worried. Some of them began to leaf through the ancient books. They were trying to predict what would happen next. Meanwhile, someone in the Bloom Divine Province found a relevant passage. An old man opened an ancient book with his hands trembling with fear and anxiety. This ancient book was written long ago by an elder of his race. It talked about what would happen should the end come. The last thunder will destroy everything with its sound. However, the 6 sages will be protected by a bright and dazzling light. Those 6 sages refer to the 6 chaos ancient gods, murmured one of his companions. So 6 lucky warriors will be selected in the source world, another one chimed in. To be chosen as one of the chaos ancient gods, there were 2 conditions that must be satisfied. First, the person must possess enormous amounts of strength. At the very least, they must be at the Holy Soul realm. The second one would be sheer luck. Knowing this secret, the warriors at the Holy Soul realm and the Eternal realm had high hopes that they could be one of the chosen chaos ancient gods. If they were selected, they were basically granted a special ticket to the next round of chaos. Out of the blue, everyone heard a buzzing sound. A beam of light suddenly appeared in the source world. It headed straight for the hall the evil god built. Meanwhile, on the 2nd floor of the hall, several cultivators of the Holy Soul realm and the Eternal realm were greedily absorbing the bloodline powers. The evil god looked at these people impassively. He appeared extremely generous, but in actuality, he felt thoroughly disgusted of them. Soon enough, he would need their help. All he could do for now was patiently satisfy their greed. Buzz! Something streaked past them from above. The beam of light pierced through the black hall and enshrouded one of the cultivators of the Holy Soul realm. The cultivator was still digesting the bloodline power he had just absorbed. He opened his eyes and saw the light enveloping his entire body. Naturally, he was awestruck for a few moments. Suddenly, he realized that he was chosen to be a chaos ancient god and master a truth. He was so happy that he jumped up from his meditating position earlier. Is he the one chosen to be a chaos ancient god? One of the cultivators whispered to his fellow cultivator. Even if we don't survive the end, he will still make it to the next chaotic era with such ease, murmured another. What a stroke of luck. He doesn't possess that much strength. Why is he chosen? It's unfair. A fierce warrior of the Holy Soul realm protested. Another warrior felt envious. Why couldn't it be me? All the warriors in this hall had been invited here to merge with the bloodline powers. Earlier, they were quite happy and satisfied as they were able to gather much power. But when they saw that one of them was chosen as a chaos ancient god, they felt terribly envious and depressed. Nevertheless, this beam of light also reminded them that there would be 6 chosen chaos ancient gods. This meant that they still had a chance. The chosen warrior was extremely excited. Anyone who was granted a sure ticket to the next chaotic era would obviously feel overjoyed. But before long, he saw a black figure approaching him. It reached out and grabbed him by his neck. The black figure was none other than the evil god. The Holy Soul realm warrior was a little flustered. He had no idea why the evil god attacked him. What are you doing? He asked as he trembled with fear. What part of this do you not understand? This is the last chaotic era. If I lose, there won't be a next chaotic era. What's the use of choosing the next chaos ancient gods? The evil god's expression was cold and apathetic. But, I was chosen, the Holy Soul realm warrior stammered as he didn't know what else to say. The evil god's hand flashed with a black light. In the blink of an eye, the warrior's body turned into colorful steam that scattered in every direction. When they saw this scene unfold right in front of them, all the other warriors were frightened. The evil god slayed the warrior in such a way they had never seen before. Even if what he said was true, this was totally uncalled for. Whether or not there would be a next round of chaos, there was no need to kill anyone so recklessly. At that very moment, they realized that the seemingly generous evil god was never a good person in the first place. A short while ago, they were looking forward to being chosen as the Chaos Ancient Gods. But now, they changed their minds. They were afraid that the light would envelope them, which in turn, would prompt the evil god to kill them. Buzz. Once again, someone had been chosen. The second beam of light appeared. It shot directly into the primitive land and fell upon the pear hill. It landed on Fuxi, who was currently standing on the jadeite platform. When the snake goddess and the others saw this, they were slightly astounded. After a second, they smiled as they understood why he was chosen. In this current chaotic era, Fuxi had never given up on achieving the finale way. Therefore, it was not surprising that he was chosen as a Chaos Ancient God. However, Fuxi smiled bitterly. I've worked so hard for so long. But in the end, I still can't live up to the expectations of the human race. Is this supposed to be a compensation for me? Well, this kind of compensation can never be fulfilled, joked the snake goddess. Obviously, they were well aware that this was the last chaotic era and there would be no next one after this. Afterward, came the third, fourth, fifth, sixth beams of light. Unfortunately, they all landed in the black hall of the evil god. The evil god killed 3 Holy Soul Realm cultivators and 1 Eternal Realm cultivator on the spot. Everyone watching the massacre was rendered speechless. After the Chaos Ancient Gods were chosen, the chaos began to clean up itself. This was done to ensure that all living beings within the chaos would be annihilated. However, there were no living beings within the chaos due to the downgrading. Like the last thunder, this round of purging had no effect. 3 days passed since that fateful day. There were lots of intricate cracks that suddenly appeared on the inner wall of the chaos. These cracks intertwined with each other and formed a huge circular array. Little by little, a needle appeared in the center of the array. When the needle first emerged, it was only the size of an embroidery needle. It was particularly tiny compared to the vast source world. However, the needle continued to extend outwards. At first, it was only a 1-inch protrusion. Then, it extended from 10 inches to 100 inches. After a while, it became 10 feet long. Then from 100 feet, it reached 1,000 feet. From that, it continued to grow until it extended up to 10 million feet. The needle grew not only in length, but also in its diameter. It continued to expand further. In just an hour, it had already expanded into a massive object. As soon as the needle appeared, the Sentry Evil God and Zen immediately noticed it. An idea flashed through their minds almost at the same time. Who would be the first target of this needle? Usually, there was only one primitive land in a chaotic era. But in this round of chaos, there were 3. Which of those primitive lands would the needle attack first? Meanwhile, there was something happening in the burial land. The downgrader was floating in midair. There was a complicated array plate right in front of him. This was exactly the same as the array that hatched the needle. The Snake Spirit King said, "The structure of the secondary world is quite exquisite. The hourglass is the one controlling the restart time. After that, the needle will end everything and signal the beginning of the next chaos. I applaud you." It was the downgrader who invented the method of creating secondary worlds. In order to downgrade the main world, he designed the aforementioned method in advance. He did this to deceive the Snake Spirit King and trick the 4 spirits sect into building one secondary world after another. This must seem shameful to the Snake Spirit King. Nonetheless, he had to flatter the downgrader. Humph, this method of the lower extreme world is awfully insignificant, the downgrader exclaimed as he fiddled with the array plate. The needle had already become incredibly massive. It changed its direction constantly and continued to grow at an even faster rate. The Sentry Evil God was watching all this. Suddenly, his expression became serious. He confirmed that the needle was heading straight for the source world. Chapter 3862, The Black Hole and the White Hole. Inside the black hole, the evil god had received the warning from the sentry. The source world would be targeted first. That bastard surely is looking down on me, huh? The evil god was vexed at the information. The Grand Master of Heaven, who was standing next to him, smiled faintly and said, "If I remember it correctly, it was the 300th chaotic era when the twin primitive lands appeared. When the first primitive land was destroyed by the needle, it didn't take long before the second was also destroyed. They might not be destroyed at the same time, but there was no exception in the face of the needle. However, they didn't know that the needle of the end could actually be controlled. The only reason why the source world was targeted first was because the downgrader felt that it was much easier to deal with. The sentry had released the illusory vision many times, which also aroused the vigilance of the downgrader. He found out that there were people in the source world who could control the power of the deep space, but they only relied on the soul extreme form, which was why the downgrader didn't really deem it as a threat. On the other hand, his real problem was Zen, who had already mastered the heavenly ring staff and possessed all the powers of the deep space. Needless to say, it would be difficult for him to deal with Zen right now. "What are you going to do?" Duran asked. "We need to come up with something very soon." The evil god contemplated for a while before he looked and asked Duran, "Your treacherous being body should be immortal, right?" "Well, technically, as long as the coordinates aren't damaged, and there's no presence of the light of annihilation, it's impossible to harm or kill the treacherous being body," Duran said confidently. "I see. Then, how about you help me with something?" The evil god said as if he already thought of something to overturn the situation. "I'm listening. What are you planning?" Duran asked. A devilish grin appeared on the face of the evil god as he said, "Well, I'm just thinking of doing something to startle the downgrader, so he'll realize that he can't just look down upon me." As of the moment, the needle was still elongating, like a massive bamboo that was growing like crazy. It wouldn't stop until it crushed its target. The needle was extending at an incredible rate, but the distance between it and the source world was also immense. At its current speed, it would still take about 2 more days before the needle reached its target. At the same time, on the Jadeite platform, Zen also gathered everyone to discuss and prepare the countermeasures. There, Jeffrey, Roche, Kincaid, Hilario, the remaining energy souls of the primeval Lord of Heaven, the Grand Supreme Elderly Lord and the other human heroes, as well as the avatars of the 3 Chaos Ancient Gods, assembled upon Zen's call. Although the end of the chaos was almost upon them, they were still able to keep calm and think straight. In this round of chaos, they were able to master and acquire power that was far stronger than the needle. With that, it shouldn't be that difficult for them to handle it. "Father, the end of the chaos is coming soon. Let me fight," Jeffrey volunteered with all sincerity. Right now, there was an inexplicable power that was surging in his body. The power was plain but powerful, and it was actually superior to the current powers of the other Eternal Realm Masters and the 3 Chaos Ancient Gods. Zen recognized Jeffrey's power and fighting spirit, but he said, "Jeffrey, you will definitely be a great help, but you can't make a move yet." "Huh, why?" Jeffrey was a bit confused. If his father had really recognized his power, wouldn't he be given the chance? "It's because the needle is not aimed at us," Zen replied. "It's actually aimed towards the source world." When everyone heard this, there was an instant expression of relief on their faces. The extreme tension had somehow subsided. "Really? Then, it gives us a bit more time. Let's wait and see what will happen first." If the needle was aimed at the source world, then the evil god would surely suffer. The snake goddess's eyebrows slightly twitched, and she butted in, "We can't relax yet. Don't underestimate the evil god. There's a huge chance that he would be able to deal with the needle. Moreover, with his twisted personality, we don't know what kind of trouble he may cause to us. We'd better be careful." Previously, the evil god expressed an intention to join hands with Zen. However, no one could really trust his words. The snake goddess is right. Indeed, we have to be on guard against the evil god, but we have to remember that we should be more vigilant towards the downgrader. I'm sure that he will make a move once the source world is already attacked. I'm afraid that we can't just watch idly. Fuxi also expressed his opinion. The evil god was pretty known as a detestable and wicked person, but his destructive power couldn't be compared to the terror that the downgrader could bring. Fortunately, the evil god couldn't downgrade the world. Though the chances were slim, if he managed to win in the end, he still wouldn't be able to destroy everything according to the will of the Bird Spirit King. Zen listened to everything they had said and nodded. "Right now, we can only wait until the needle arrives at the source world. Once it's there, we shall act according to the circumstances. If the evil god would be at a disadvantage, we'll have no choice but to help him." Each round of chaos produced a different civilization, and the way they treated the needle also varied. Once, there was a civilization that accurately predicted where the needle would come from. Thus, they had set up a big array on the inner wall of the chaos in advance, in an attempt to seal the needle outside of the chaos and eliminate it on its bud. However, their plan still failed in the end. Still, some civilizations went all out and set up enchanted barriers to block the growing needle. However, they weren't able to fight off the power of the needle. The 77th civilization, which was the human race, settled for a mediocre method. Like most civilizations before them, they guarded the primitive land and only relied on the most powerful other shore tokens to gather their power on a human ancestor. They hoped that a single human would be able to resist the needle, but as expected, it ended in failure. After that, over 1,000 chaotic eras had passed, and all sorts of strange civilizations had appeared. There were so many ways to resist the needle, but no one managed to succeed. Surprisingly, the creatures in this round of chaos were not prepared at all. Even as the needle approached, the 3 primitive lands that existed didn't take any action to directly prevent it. 2 days later, the needle already appeared about 50 million miles away from the source world and was fast approaching. It's here, it's coming. A faint grin appeared on the face of the evil god acting as a sentry, as he shook the black chains. Within 5 minutes, the needle was just 30 million miles away from the source world. Another 5 minutes had elapsed, and the needle was only 10 million miles away. 5 million miles, 1 million miles, 500,000 miles, 100,000 miles. Finally, at this distance, the sentry could already observe it pretty well. The front end of the needle was very thin as an embroidery needle, but the diameter of the entire needle was actually as huge as the source world. Therefore, the needle would not necessarily pierce through the source world, but would rather crush everything in it. 50,000 miles, 10,000 miles, 3,000 miles. At this distance, the front end of the needle had almost landed on the surface of the source world. What the hell are they waiting for? The sentry stared intently at what was happening. What's going on? Aren't they going to do anything? Zen murmured to himself, baffled at the strange behavior of the people in the source world. The 6 pairs of compound eyes of the downgrader also flashed. He couldn't see any movement or reaction in the source world. Did they give up resisting and just accept their death? Pathetic, the downgrader said in a low voice. However, when the needle was just within 1,000 miles, a space fluctuation suddenly occurred in front of it. Then, it was Duran who appeared in front of the needle. Compared to the point of the needle, Duran almost looked negligible. But there was no hint of fear on his face. He just raised his wings and rushed forward. Crack! The great momentum of the needle caused it to pierce through Duran's body, and instantly came out from his back. Duran didn't stop the needle at all. Instead, he was pushed by the needle towards the source world. Upon seeing that they were about to hit the source world, he smiled and shouted, "Now!" Wah, wah, wah. Strange blaring voices were heard from within his body. Suddenly, a black hole was released from Duran's body and expanded at an unimaginable speed. In just 3 seconds, the black hole expanded from the size of a person to the size of the entire source world. Then, the needle that was about to hit the source world, drilled into the huge black hole. Wah, wah, wah. At the same time, a white hole appeared on the other side of the source world. It also expanded to the size of the source world, and it faced the burial land. Chapter 3863, The In and Out Holes. Zen watched warily as the white hole formed rapidly, the needle drilling out from within it. The needle itself still continued to extend at incredible speed. The distance between the burial land and the source world was not too big, and the needle steadily approached the burial land. From the jadeite platform, Zen projected this shocking scene, so that everyone could see it. Is this a space channel? Kendrick asked, his eyes widening with shock. Everyone could tell that the black hole and the white hole were 2 ends of a space channel. It was relatively simple to construct a space channel, but it definitely was no easy feat to build a space channel big enough for the needle to pass through. This space channel was so large that it could fit the entire source world. They are the in and out holes built from the hyperspace extreme form, Zen explained calmly. The black hole swallowed everything in its path, whereas the white hole served as the exit for everything that entered the black hole. Once the needle entered through the black hole, there was nowhere else for it to go but the exit through white hole. What an incredible method, the snake goddess praised, beaming with awe. I don't know how the downgrader will deal with this. The needle is moving so fast, Kincaid said excitedly. The evil god had built the in and out holes right in the nick of time, and the needle was now approaching the burial land. It would have been fine if the downgrader had prepared in advance. But now, since it was so sudden, it was difficult for him to change the direction of the needle. 300 miles, 100 miles, 10 miles, 1 mile. The needle was so close to piercing the burial land. Suddenly, the needle abruptly stopped in its path. It was as though a giant hand had grabbed it with force. In the burial land, the plate in front of the downgrader had turned a dark red. In the face of danger, he had chosen to forcefully stop the needle. A trace of anger was revealed in his 6 pairs of eyes. He never expected that the evil god would master the hyperspace extreme form, much less that he would fall into such a trap. The burial land had almost been destroyed just now. Everyone on the jadeite platform was shocked at the turn of events. Why did the needle stop? The needle isn't long enough to reach the burial land. No, the snake goddess said, her eyes growing misty. The needle is controlled by the downgrader, and the source world is the first target chosen by him. The other people exchanged surprised glances. What the snake goddess said was logical. What? Meanwhile, from the Sentry Evil God's perspective, his eyes almost popped out of his head when he saw what happened. His real self's expression darkened. He immediately arrived at the same conclusion as the snake goddess. So it's true, the needle is really controlled by the downgrader. I won't stand for this. Since the needle stopped in its tracks, it just stood still, a mile away from the burial land. After a while, a black dot appeared on the surface of the burial land. Quickly, it grew to be a large black hole. In a matter of seconds, a black hole had been built by the downgrader by using the hyperspace extreme form. After he had created the hole, he did something to the plate in front of him, and the red color that lingered on the plate disappeared. The needle once again began to move forward. Swoosh! Using the exact same technique, the downgrader turned the tables on them. As the huge needle plunged into the black hole, another white hole appeared above the source world. Once more, the needle was steadily advancing towards the source world. The needle had ended many rounds of chaos, and every time it could do that in an instant. No matter how powerful another shore token was, no one could change the needle's course. By now, the direction of the needle had been changed 4 times in a row. Yet, it continued to plow forward through the distorted space. As he watched the needle rush towards the source world, the evil god found that he no longer felt indignant. Instead, he felt quite excited. He figured that the downgrader viewed him as insignificant, since he dared attack his source world first. With a sinister smile, the evil god vowed he would make the downgrader regret choosing him as a target. Buzz. As he waved his hand slightly, the hyperspace extreme form was activated once more. The power of the deep space was incredible, but it consumed too much energy each time. Building a set of in and out holes for the needle was extremely taxing to the evil god, since he needed to continuously draw power from the source world. But now that he was in high spirits, he no longer cared about how much it cost. A new set of in and out holes appeared. The black hole and the white hole appeared at the same time, sending the needle back. Soon, the third set of holes appeared. Once more, the needle was heading towards the burial land. Seeing the needle being sent back again, the downgrader sneered. He saw the evil god's message loud and clear, he was being challenged. I don't know how much extreme form energy you have mastered, but is the energy of the source world enough to defeat me? I'll just keep returning the needle to you. Buzz. The downgrader built yet another set of holes, reverting the course of the needle back to the source world. The downgrader smiled confidently. Since the evil god built several holes in such a short time, he figured the energy of the source world would be depleted rapidly. Ultimately, once the energy was used up, it would collapse. The downgrader was so sure of this, so he chose to deal with the source world first. In comparison, Zen was much more difficult to deal with, because his ancestry-level bloodline could provide endless energy. Seeing that the needle was sent back again, the evil god frowned slightly. Turning around, he stared at the primitive land floating nearby. Zen, you idle fool. Don't just watch the battle from afar. Come help me. Once he'd finished speaking, the evil god abruptly whipped around to build the 5th set of holes. Once again, the black hole swallowed the needle, but this time, its white hole was facing Zen's primitive land. Meanwhile, on the jadeite platform, everyone had been focused on the movements of the needle. The needle that had changed its direction so many times in a row looked like a big snake that was coiling around the space. Seeing such a huge thing moving rapidly, everyone was both anxious yet transfixed. This was the needle that would end the chaos. It was a terrible weapon that had annihilated over 1,000 civilizations. However, now it was being practically toyed with by the evil god and the downgrader. Ah, the white hole. Jeffrey cried when he saw the white hole appear facing his father's primitive land. Everyone wore a nervous expression as they eyed the needle steadily approaching. If it wasn't stopped, the needle would crash into the primitive land in a matter of seconds, crushing the Pear Hill, the ruined graveyard, and the other places. Of course, the evil god wants us involved, Zen said, as though he had been expecting this. The evil god knew perfectly well where Zen's position was, so he had shifted the needle's target to his primitive land. However, Zen was well prepared, so he didn't panic. As he pointed a finger to the skies, an avatar slowly floated up. A ball of energy floated above his head. It was the hyperspace extreme form. The 6th set of holes were created by Zen. As usual, the black hole swallowed the needle in one gulp, but Zen didn't return it to the evil god. Instead, the white hole faced the burial land. Once again, the massive needle was charging towards the downgrader. Chapter 3864, Hold on. Ha ha, you are united, the downgrader sneered. The Snake Spirit King said beside him, we can't redirect the path of the needle indefinitely. I can constantly create the in and out holes, and Zen can also do so. But how can that being from the source world also do this? The downgrader asked. Like Zen, his energy did not originate from the primitive land. He had boundless energy and could create limitless in and out holes. But the source world couldn't do this. This temporary balance would sooner or later be destroyed because of the energy drain from the source world. The downgrader was in no rush. As time ticked by, the situation would more and more turn in his favor. He stretched out his hand, and the seventh set of in and out holes appeared. The needle flew towards the source world. Without saying a word, the evil god waved his hand and released the eighth set of holes. He didn't let Zen be an onlooker. He directed the needle towards Zen's primitive land. However, once he released the eighth set of holes, his expression became cautious. Although the source world had expanded by more than 1,000 times, and the energy contained within it was much powerful than it used to be, the energy required to create the holes was massive. The evil god had released 4 sets of holes in rapid succession, which had consumed most of the source world's energy. If he continued to release more holes, the source world would probably not survive this. But now that things had picked up momentum, there was no way out of this for the evil god. It was obvious that the first one who couldn't hold on would lose. Soon, Zen created the 9th set of holes. The downgrader released the 10th set. The evil god unleashed the 11th set. The 12th set. The 13th set. The needle drilled in and out of the black and white holes. It had already zigzagged to and fro 13 times, and it was now heading towards the source world. The hyperspace extreme form. The evil god tried to release the 14th set of holes. He absorbed the remaining energy of the source world and began to transform it into the holes, but the process was abruptly cut off halfway. The energy of the source world had been utterly spent. The evil god raised his eyebrows, his eyes revealing rare traces of uneasiness. The Grand Master of Heaven observed the change in the evil god. He knew clearly how much the drain on the extreme form energy was. The evil god probably wouldn't be able to hold on for long. The needle was still careening ahead at an extreme velocity. Almost half a minute later, it would hit the source world. At this moment, the corners of the evil god's mouth suddenly curved up, forming a leering smile. When did I become so indecisive? He thought. In the past, he had been so cold that he could sacrifice everything to reach his goal, his future, family, strength, status, and even his own life. All he craved was to defeat Zen. Now that he took control of the source world, he unwittingly became soft-hearted. He began to care about Edna and Shira, who had tried her best to please him, and also the numerous living beings in the source world. Once people began to care, they developed weaknesses. The evil god realized that in caring, he would suffer a complete failure. The source world is so vast and boundless. It should have much more than just a little energy, the evil god muttered darkly. His will was transmitted through the source world, and soon it arrived in a province belonging to the divine farmer race. Humans dwelt there. When the will of the evil god was felt, everyone in the province raised their heads. The citizens, the true gods, and even the warriors at the other shore realm were all terrified when they felt this indomitable will. They didn't know what fate awaited them. The source world is in grave danger. You must offer yourselves to save it. The booming voice of the evil god rang in everyone's ears. Hearing this, everyone was immediately overcome by an ominous feeling. They were being told to sacrifice themselves. For what? Why did they have to sacrifice themselves to save the vast majority? Needless to say, they were most reluctant. However, the evil god didn't offer them any alternatives. Splash! Some plants, soil, sand, and stones quickly rose up into the air, turning into fine powder and finally disintegrating. Then the rocks, houses, animals, and people who were still resisting were all sucked into the air by an irresistible force where they also disintegrated and dissipated. In the end, the many layers of the ground, the caves, the bedrocks underneath, and even the creatures hiding underground were also sucked into the air and disintegrated. They were not destroyed. Instead, they were all transformed into energy. Before long, the evil god had transformed everything in the province into energy, leaving behind only a layer of crushed shell that was 3 or 4 miles thick. If this thin layer of shell was converted into energy, an opening would be created in the source world, and this would let Zen and the downgrader notice the weakness of the source world. More and more provinces suffered the same fate. Hundreds of billions of creatures from hundreds of races in more than 30 huge provinces were all deprived of their lives, and their bodies were consumed after they heard the words of the evil god. Everything happened in less than 10 seconds. The energy gained from these living materials successfully created the 14th set of holes for the evil god. A holy soul realm master was engrossed with his cultivating in the black hall of the evil god. He was one of the masters invited by the evil god. He possessed dozens of life tokens of his clansmen. The moment the province he had called home was destroyed, all these life tokens were shattered. What happened? The warrior screamed in agony and took out a large bronze mirror. In the mirror, he saw the empty province. Every living thing in the province had disappeared. Oh, my God, what happened to the province? It is gone. Why is everything gone? He was not the only one to be shocked. A member of another race also discovered that the life lamps of his clansmen had been extinguished. Although he couldn't detect what was going on with his clansmen, he reasoned they must have suffered the same fate. Shish! The real evil god suddenly appeared next to the warrior, held his neck with one hand, and made a gesture of silence towards the crowd with the other. They have all been sacrificed for the source world. You should be beholden to me. If I didn't do that, you would have perished too. The warrior clenched his fists, exposing blue veins. However, when the evil god clamped his neck so gently, all of his strength vanished, and there was no possibility of him resisting. Every muscle and bone in his body turned into powder, and then into energy. You not only need to know devotion, but also your place. The evil god grinned at the crowd and then walked towards the third floor. Although the evil god had decisively sacrificed dozens of provinces at the last moment, the speed at which he created the holes was slower than normal, which allowed Zen and the downgrader to discover some clues. The evil god released the holes when the needle was only 500 miles away from the source world. The energy of the source world may not be enough, the snake goddess keenly observed. That's to be expected. When limited energy faces off against infinite energy, it's not hard to imagine the end, Kincaid said, shaking his head. Zen, the evil god, and the downgrader all possessed extreme form energy, so they seemed to be standing shoulder to shoulder at the starting line, but the evil god and the source world would surely be the first to fall behind. Zen didn't say anything and focused on releasing the 15th set of holes. The 16th set, the 17th set, the 18th set. These huge holes overlapped in a most complicated way. Although the needle resolutely moved forward, it was difficult to distinguish its intended goal. By the time the evil god had released the 20th set of holes, he had sacrificed over 100 provinces. Chapter 3865, The Maximum Number of In and Out Holes. A long time ago, Yellow Thirk, Divine Farmer, and Othniel also attempted to destroy many provinces in the source world. Back then, they used the minimum spaces flames to burn down about 300 provinces. However, they weren't fully destroyed. Although life was burned, the substances that comprised them were still there, and the foundation for nurturing these substances was still present. The entire sea was evaporated by the blazing flames, but the water just turned into rain and returned to the ground. However, this time, the evil god transformed all the materials in the world into pure energy that formed the enormous in and out holes. This kind of drastic destruction would never be reversed. In the face of the aggressive and terrifying downgrader, the evil god could only come up with such a method. Meanwhile, in the burial land, a blue light film was unfolded in front of the downgrader. At the center of this light film, a huge sphere appeared. This sphere was actually the source world, and its surface was covered with dark blue spots. Ha ha, what are you thinking? The downgrader let out a loud burst of laughter. Turning such a massive amount of materials into pure energy is like quenching your thirst by drinking poison. Let's see how long you could hold on. At the same time, on the jadeite platform, there was also a blue light film that appeared in front of Zen. From it, Zen could sense the miserable situation the evil god was in. It seems that the evil god has already consumed more than 100 provinces. So many living beings in the source world have suffered and were sacrificed, Zen said with a frown on his face. Well, from the perspective of the evil god, he is doing the right thing, Kincaid said. It is necessary to sacrifice those provinces, or else, all of the creatures of the source world would be annihilated. But if all the materials of the source world are consumed, then there's no point in fighting, the snake goddess remarked. Zen nodded as his thoughts aligned exactly to what the snake goddess said. However, Hilario, who had kept silent all this time, suddenly said, "It's still early to say that." Kincaid, Zen, the snake goddess, and the others looked at him as they heard what he said. As the leader of the Bold Conjecture House, Hilario was known to be an extremely knowledgeable and talented person. At this moment, he might have other insight that none of them had thought of yet. Can all of you easily construct a space channel? Hilario then asked them. Fuxi and the others nodded. It was, in fact, very easy for them to do it. Then, Hilario stretched out two of his fingers. Suddenly, a power of space burst out from his fingertips and a thin space channel was instantly formed. Immediately after, a second space channel was formed. Then, a third, and a fourth. Just within seconds, he was able to construct 1,000 space channels. Hilario, what are you trying to do? Even Kincaid was quite confused at what Hilario was trying to prove. However, Hilario didn't answer and just continued to build numerous space channels. When he had created about 1,500 space channels, these space channels between his hands suddenly became extremely unstable. The originally well-arranged space channels started to intertwine with each other, and ultimately, they exploded. The moment the explosion happened, Hilario gently rubbed his hands and the mass of energy that exploded immediately vanished. I still don't get it. How is it related to what the evil god is trying to do? Fuxi couldn't help but ask in confusion. The snake goddess was the first to state her hypothesis. The number of space channels in an area should only be limited. If there are too many, they would become unstable and collapse. She had actually done similar experiments before, but she didn't think of this concept. So, what you're trying to say is... Zen's eyes narrowed as he kind of understood what was going on inside Hilario's head. The space power contained in the in and out holes is several times stronger. Like what I've demonstrated earlier, if there would be many in and out holes in the same area, they will all easily collapse, Hilario explained. Then, how many in and out holes can this area bear? Kincaid asked straightforwardly. Hilario furrowed his eyebrows while shaking his head. I can't say the exact number. Maybe 20, 30, or even more. If the in and out holes collapse, will the needle in the hole also be destroyed? Fuxi asked as he started to understand where the thought was headed. However, Hilario still shook his head. He couldn't give any definite answer because he could only speculate based on his own knowledge. Besides, it was the first time that someone came up with this idea to deal with the needle. It was impossible to actually know what could happen. At the same time, Zen released 21st set of in and out holes. Then, another set of in and out holes was released by the downgrader. The evil god responded by releasing another set, making it the 23rd in the area. The competition that took place after the needle appeared became anticlimactic. But obviously, it wouldn't end up in a stalemate, because the evil god couldn't hold on much longer. Every time he transformed some of the Source World's provinces, the Holy Soul Realm warriors and the Eternal Realm warriors on his side would cringe and show a depressed expression. However, they didn't dare to say anything to the evil god. Right now, it was the evil god who was deciding on everything. If they would go against him, they might be the ones transformed into energy. Even the Grand Master of Heaven didn't say anything, though his face was also incomparably grim. At the back of his mind, he knew that if this went on, they would definitely lose. Not long after, the downgrader released the 31st set of in and out holes, increasing the number of holes in the area to 62. The needle passed through the maze of holes, making it impossible to determine where was the front end and the back end. Without any hesitation, the evil god transformed over 30 provinces and released a black hole again. However, at this moment, something unusual started happening. The surroundings of the black hole became slightly distorted. The more unusual thing was that the distorted ripples around this black hole also appeared in other black holes. Upon seeing this, the evil god revealed a devilish smile. Finally, the real evil god had tens of thousands of avatars, and each one of them possessed exceptional intelligence. According to what they agreed upon with the real evil god, these avatars took action independently and carried out all sorts of odd experiments that usually involved the space power. From the start, the evil god knew that with such a large number of in and out holes, they would inevitably collapse soon enough. This was actually what he was waiting for. Crash. Then, the evil god released another white hole, and ripples of space fluctuations also appeared around it. When the ripples spread to the other white holes, all of the in and out holes began to sway left and right. One moment, they were expanding, the next they were shrinking. Just as Hilario deduced, the huge space channels finally became extremely unstable. As a rigid body, the needle would definitely conflict with all of the unstable in and out holes. Some of the holes that shrank tightly held the needle. The space and the needle violently rubbed against each other, producing ear-piercing sound waves in the entire chaos. As the other holes expanded, they also collided with the needle inside, causing even stronger space distortion. Right now, the space was in utter disarray. It's really happening. With the 32 set of in and out holes, the space couldn't bear them. The Grand Supreme Elderly Lord exclaimed in surprise as he witnessed the chaos. But it doesn't seem like the in and out holes could do anything with the needle. I think it is withstanding the violent reactions of the holes, Jeffrey said as he observed. It would actually be better if the needle is cut off by the broken in and out holes. The 3 primitive lands would only be impacted by the space windstorm. Hilario said in a gloomy tone. But what if it can't be cut off? Zen asked. I'm not sure, but theoretically, if the needle is able to bear that great force, it would still be compressed and twisted by the power of the space. Hilario demonstrated by showing a crooked finger. Then it would straighten up. He continued demonstrating and flicked his finger. With his explanation, the others easily understood what he meant. The needle would become as thin as a steel rope, and the great force that it would release would destroy everything it came into contact with. Just as Hilario finished his demonstration, all of the in and out holes suddenly collapsed simultaneously, leaving many pieces of needles floating in the air. The needle was not actually broken, but it was the illusion created after the space was wrecked. The moment that the in and out holes collapsed, the pieces of the needle began twisting like countless frantic leeches. Chapter 3866, The Gamble of Life. The needle, twisted and distorted badly, trembled violently as it tried to return to its original straight profile. If it wanted to forcefully break the space, it had to be connected as a whole. This was a fight of physics. The needle represented an indestructible mass, but the space had been separated. Consequently, the aftermath was extreme. All kinds of shock waves burst and rippled outwards. Boom, 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 boom. A huge claw-shaped shock wave swept towards Zen's primitive land, gouging out a large chunk from its surface. Another shock wave drilled into the earth, leaving a pit that was dozens of miles deep. While Zen's primitive land and the downgrader's burial land were caught in the line of fire, they were both solid enough to bear the impact. However, the evil god had transformed the materials in many large provinces into energy. Consequently, many parts of the source world were weakened. When the shock waves rained onto the source world, it cracked like an eggshell. In a matter of seconds, the entire surface of the source world was riddled with holes. Fortunately, no materials or creatures had been left in these provinces, so it wasn't that big a deal. However, the proud evil god couldn't tolerate this easily. Bang, bang, bang. After a few moments of twisting and turning, the indestructible needle finally broke the rules of space. The space that bound and distorted the needle broke, and the parts of the needle began to connect again. Even though the segments of the needle connected, it was still crooked, since it was forcibly twisted by the in and out holes. Then, the needle tried to return to its originally straight state, moving like an uncontrollable metal whip that was lashing around violently. It smashed anything in its way, without exception. Splash! A deafening sound of grinding metal echoed throughout the space as the needle tried to stretch back to a straight profile, a small crooked part of it shooting towards the burial land. What in the world? The downgrader's eyes widened as he saw the incoming needle. He initially had absolute advantage over the whole situation. He had felt like the source world didn't even qualify to join this battle, and figured they would be the first to suffer. Even he could tell that the evil god was trying to drag out his feeble existence at this point. Yet, how did the tables turn so suddenly? Splash! As the needle whipped towards the burial land at a terrifying speed, the downgrader's eyes darted all over the place as he tried to come up with a solution. He wanted to build a hole, but the space in this area was still in chaos, so that was out of the question. Stop! The downgrader shouted, as he controlled the array plate in front of him. The entire plate was then enveloped in a red light. What happened next was exactly the opposite of what he wanted. While he could control the extending speed of the needle, reduce the extending speed to 0, and even force the needle to shrink back, he couldn't change the direction of the needle. Moreover, the huge stress contained in the needle from having been twisted was outside his control. As a result, he wasn't able to stop the needle. To his horror, the needle continued heading towards the burial land. Crack, rumble, the collision made a deafeningly thunderous noise. One of the 3 corners of the burial land had been smashed into smithereens. Inside this corner was a huge space, where countless troubled creatures lived. They had been clamoring and raising their morale, as they were preparing to join the upcoming war. But before the real war had even started, the skies began to crumble before them. Broken pieces of the sky, together with a huge silver creature, fell to the earth. The troubled creatures were swept away in the blink of an eye, they didn't even have the time to scream. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The burial land was originally in a stagnant state, but once one of its corners was hit, the remaining kinetic energy pushed itself to spin. Fortunately, after colliding into the burial land's corner, that specific curved part of the needle instantly straightened out and did not cause any further damage. However, there were many other curved parts of the needle that were still moving irregularly, trying to straighten out. On the jadeite platform, Zen and his companions were dumbfounded as they watched this scene unfold before them. Although Hilario had expected this, even he was taken aback. The evil god, was this his plan from the very beginning? This is horrible. He is gambling his own life, the snake goddess said, her eyebrows furrowing deeply. Zen didn't spare any time to speak. He focused on controlling the primitive land, avoiding the needle as best as he could. A fifth of the burial land had been destroyed after one of its corners was hit. If it was hit by the needle head-on, it was doomed. The same went for Zen's primitive land. Unfortunately, it was so vast that it was hard to navigate in such a way that they could avoid the needle completely. As the primitive land moved slowly, the needle whipped around violently. Then, its bent head shot in the primitive land's direction at a frightening speed. Everyone on the jadeite platform raised their heads in unison. A huge tear appeared on the blood-red sky, as if a pair of scissors had cut open the blood-red cloth, revealing the chaos outside. It seemed the huge needle had shot forward enough to pierce through the primitive land's skies, but it had stopped there and whipped back. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief. If the needle had hacked down any further, the primitive land would have been split in half. They were lucky it had left only a wound. Now, the needle was heading towards the source world at an even faster speed. Fortunately, it stopped in its tracks again, and whipped backwards, towards the burial land. In the black hall, the evil god buried his face in his hands and began to laugh hysterically. His shrill laughter echoed in everyone's ears. When faced with this undefeatable opponent, the evil god had decided to unleash utter chaos, to even out the playing field. While that was his plan, it was also a gamble. Seeing the needle coming straight for him once more, the downgrader was consumed with fury. If this was a game of luck, why wasn't luck on his side? Right now, if the needle hit the burial land, it would probably be completely destroyed. Withdraw, the downgrader said wisely. He had grown quick-witted in the face of danger. He controlled the array plate to force the needle to retract. Then, he watched as the needle shrank rapidly. Just as it was about to lash at the burial land, it shrank to a size that completely missed the burial land. Now, it was shooting towards the opposite direction once more. It's time for you to die. The downgrader laughed maniacally. The source world was right in the needle's path. The downgrader controlled the array plate to make the needle grow rapidly again. Swoosh! The needle turned into an unimaginably huge metal whip that was lashing towards the source world. The source world at this point was like a fragile egg that was about to be smashed with a stone. Chapter 3867, The Collision of Worlds. Being smashed, the source world released a massive amount of fragments. The largest of the fragments were several trillions of miles long and wide, while the smaller ones were thousands of miles long. They formed a spreading band of debris that floated up and down. After the needle smashed the source world, it rebounded in the opposite direction, then swung back. Eventually, the vacillations slowed, and the needle stopped moving, returning to its original form. Fuxi, the snake goddess, Yasamine, Eastern Emperor Tai, and the other natives of the source world looked at their broken world with silent sorrow. They had been born and raised in the source world. It was their home. Its utter destruction was a heavy cross to bear, and they felt heartbroken at the loss. At the moment, however, they had little time to nurse their grief. Once the needle had returned to its original straight form, it began extending further and further. It was aimed now at the primitive land. The burial land also sped up, keeping parallel with the primitive land. As everyone watched, a few minutes later, the point of the needle came very close to the primitive land. Just as it was about to pierce the land, a new set of in and out holes had been formed. Because the primitive land had already left that chaotic space, Zen could easily release a new set of in and out holes. The black hole sucked in the needle, and the white hole spat it out. The needle was now heading towards the burial land, which was flying parallel to the primitive land. As the needle drew closer, another set of in and out holes appeared. Immediately the needle vanished into the black hole and was sent back over the primitive land. This was the same situation as before, except this time, the source world was gone, and the fierce battle between the three worlds had turned into a desperate contest between the remaining two. The key point was that both sides were moving. This was important, because it prevented the space around them from collapsing due to the number of holes being created. Ideally, with an infinite energy source, an infinite number of holes could be summoned, letting the needle bounce from one point to another for countless repetitions. Strange sounds were released as the enormous needle moved in space. It almost sounded like the splashing of waves and the howling of wind, at the same time. As the huge needle zigzagged back and forth, it released the noise of a massive tide surging unhampered through space. A corner of the burial land had been broken, so the sound was clearly transmitted to everyone inside. In the face of the deadlock, the downgrader was patient. He mechanically released the holes to counterattack. His companion was less sanguine. The Snake Spirit King couldn't help but ask, "How long will you be able to keep doing this? Will you just go on indefinitely?" "Of course not," the downgrader replied calmly. "Then what are you going to do?" said the Snake Spirit King anxiously. The downgrader's tone remained cool and steady. "I need you to fight," he said. "Me? How?" said the Snake Spirit King, sounding startled and confused. If the two worlds collided, there was no question about his fighting abilities. The Snake Spirit King would not hesitate to lead the charge and rush into battle. But as things stood right now, there was no other role for him to play but that of a passive onlooker. "Take this," said the downgrader. He pointed directly at the Snake Spirit King with his finger. A bright white ring had enveloped the king's head, the embryo of the white hole. The Snake Spirit King looked down at the white ring, his eyes widening. "What should I do?" "Send it over," the downgrader replied. "What do you mean, I have to send the hole over?" said the Snake Spirit King, looking stunned. "Of course," the downgrader said coldly. His manner left absolutely no room for negotiation. The Snake Spirit King was not fully convinced by this plan, but he had no choice except to agree. Within minutes, the Snake Spirit King's body became blurry. It was fusing into the environment. After the Snake Spirit King was completely concealed, the downgrader sent him into the chaos. As the needle approached the burial land, the Snake Spirit King leapt up. Moving with quiet precision, he landed on the silver needle and attached himself to it. The Snake Spirit King was relatively large compared to many other creatures, but compared to the gigantic needle he was tiny. Moreover, since the downgrader had helped him to hide himself, it was virtually impossible to see him with the naked eye. With another strange, buzzing and sloshing sound, the needle once again changed its direction. A new set of in and out holes had appeared, and the needle was now extending towards the primitive land. Zen did not detect the presence of the Snake Spirit King. He simply released new holes, planning to keep sending the needle back towards the burial land. In that instant, the shadow of a snake detached itself from the needle. As the Snake Spirit King jumped, he released the white ring on his head. In a split second the white ring had expanded into a massive white hole. As Zen watched with astonishment, a corner of the burial land slid out from the white hole, crashing into the primitive land. The Snake Spirit King, positioned in the center of the white hole, was carried into the primitive land. With a heavy boom, the two worlds collided. The primitive land started to shake. So did the pear hill and the jadeite platform. Zen, Kincaid, the snake goddess, and the others had not expected this turn of events. Before their very eyes, the blood-red sky had been torn apart, revealing a sharp corner of the burial land drilling in. Meanwhile, they saw the shadow of an enormous snake rolling in the air. It was none other than the Snake Spirit King. The Snake Spirit King was slightly dazed, for he had also felt the brunt of the impact. Nevertheless, he was triumphant to find himself in the primitive land. "I have come in," he cried. The downgrader did not respond. Azure space doors appeared on the corner of the burial land, and a group of black troubled creatures rushed out. There were so many of them that it was impossible to count. They surged out of the doors and swarmed in the sky like locusts. From a distance, they looked like an ominous, thick black mist. There was a buzz as a figure suddenly appeared in front of the Snake Spirit King. It was an incarnation of Zen. "We meet again," roared Snake Spirit King. "Today I will have my revenge." However, even as he spoke, a powerful force locked onto his huge body. At the same time, Zen said coolly, "This is my territory. Here, you can't be considered my opponent." Zen stretched out his fingers and made a gentle pinching motion. Instantly, the light of annihilation covered the Snake Spirit King's body, while the force that locked him in place increased tenfold. The Snake Spirit King, as a treacherous being, was abnormally strong. But he was not even able to offer the slightest resistance to Zen's attack. Inch by inch, he was crushed by the unyielding force, until he had dissipated completely. In the past, the Snake Spirit King had the advantage in the Jade Pure realm due to his reliance on the limited omnipotent stone. It was different now. Zen was omniscient and omnipotent, and the Snake Spirit King no longer had even a small chance of defeating him. However, the troubled creatures continued to howl and hiss as they poured out of the space doors. The noise they made was overwhelming. Zen watched them without any discernible change of expression. By now, there were at least hundreds of thousands of troubled creatures swarming in the red sky. The ones in the front had already noticed and targeted Zen. They let out their strange howling cries as they rushed towards him. You are too weak." Zen tilted his head slightly, and waved a hand in their direction. He released a powerful surge of energy that transformed into invisible blades, which shot with deadly precision towards the troubled creatures. In a second, the invisible blades sank into the flesh of the troubled creatures. They did not even understand what was happening. One moment, the wind was blowing in their ears, and in the next, they had been chopped and sliced into pieces. Black blood rained down as broken and dismembered limbs sailed through the air. All the troubled creatures died instantly. However, those space doors were still open, and more troubled creatures emerged. The attack showed no signs of slowing down. Zen flicked his hand a few more times, until the air was thick with the stench of blood and death. However, as he slaughtered these troubled creatures without any difficulty, he felt doubt and suspicion forming in his mind. These creatures were cannon fodder. It was meaningless to send them in for the purpose of defeating Zen. Why was the downgrader doing this? What was he planning? Chapter 3868, Illusion. Zen slightly raised his right hand. More invisible blades emerged and shot towards the space doors. As they penetrated through the bodies of the troubled creatures, these blades hit the surface of the space doors. Whoosh, crack, the space doors were actually as fragile as a piece of glass in the face of Zen's invisible blades. He was able to effortlessly break them into pieces. However, just as Zen shattered them, more space doors suddenly appeared around him. With this, more troubled creatures continued to swarm and rush out. Zen couldn't help but snort at the sight of all the new troubled creatures that surfaced, but he just continued to attack them and kill them off without breaking a sweat. At the same time, the burial land could witness the merciless death of the troubled creatures. Although it seemed that these troubled creatures were flooding the area, it only took Zen a few moments before he finished them off. As the number of the space doors increased, Zen also released more and more blades. The rate at which he killed the troubled creatures was much faster than their appearance. That was why he was able to fully obliterate them along with the space doors. However, after killing them off, Zen suddenly noticed that there was something wrong with the bodies that he had slain. After Zen had successfully killed them off, their corpses didn't actually fall to the ground. Instead, they floated in the air as if they weren't affected by gravity. From afar, they looked like black insects in various shapes that hovered over a large area. Did you finally realize? The Snake Spirit King's voice sounded in a contemptuous tone. Too bad for you, it's too late. The black corpses began to move and merged with the other bodies until they formed a humongous hand that attempted to grab Zen. Is that it? Zen said with an unimpressed tone. He then narrowed his eyes and gathered his power. He summoned countless invisible blades that formed a storm around him, spinning from top to bottom. However, as soon as the invisible blades were about to set out, they were suddenly destroyed. What the hell happened? Zen was taken aback and was confused at the sudden turn of events. Do you think that this is still your territory? This area has already been contaminated by the troubled creatures. This space is now under our control. Prepare to die. The enormous hand made up of the corpses of the troubled creatures completely grasped Zen's body and exerted a tremendous force. Splat. In an instant, Zen's whole body was crushed into pieces. That's what you get for being too arrogant. You're only human. How dare you? The Snake Spirit King suddenly stopped in the middle of his sentence, surprised at what he saw from afar. Another avatar of Zen appeared outside the contaminated area. He stared at him with an indifferent expression and said, "The bodies of the troubled creatures are actually filled with the energy of the pollution extreme form, which is a kind of energy to contaminate the space. I've never used it before, so I wanted to verify what it could do." What are you so happy about? The real Zen was still on the Jadeite platform, while the Snake Spirit King was facing his avatar. He could actually summon as many avatars as he could if he wanted to. You arrogant bastard. The Snake Spirit King felt so humiliated with Zen's mockery that he was filled with rage. He quickly controlled the black corpses and formed a huge hand again, aiming directly at Zen. However, Zen didn't even dodge, and the big hand crushed him again. Immediately after, another avatar appeared. This time, Zen raised his hand, and balls of light the size of marbles condensed behind him. These balls of light were not created from his omnipotent power, but rather from the purification extreme form, which could instantly purify the space that was contaminated by the pollution extreme form. Whoosh, whoosh, the balls of light rained on the black corpses torrentially. They drilled into them one after another. Suddenly, the black color of the corpses quickly faded and turned into the color of the flesh. These countless flesh-colored corpses floated in the air and gave off a terrifying aura. Soon enough, the contaminated space returned to its original state. If Zen hadn't obtained the heavenly ring staff, he wouldn't be able to do anything about the pollution extreme form. As a result, he would have no way to prevent the downgrader from polluting and devouring his entire primitive land. But now, it didn't even take him much effort to restore it and launch a counterattack. This is our place. Although the burial land forcefully broke in, they still wouldn't be able to do anything with Zen. The snake goddess assessed that the situation they were in was much better than she imagined. But I still didn't have the chance to make a move. Jeffrey was sulking a bit because he had been itching to fight in this war. However, Zen had already blocked the burial land by only using a few of his avatars. Will you continue to hide behind the Snake Spirit King and these weak creatures? I didn't expect that you were such a spineless coward. Zen continued to unleash his invisible blades to kill the troubled creatures. From time to time, he would use the purification extreme form when the black corpses had already accumulated to a certain extent. My master doesn't need to deal with you personally. You're not even worth his effort. The Snake Spirit King sneered. At the same time, several huge space doors appeared. This time, the Snake Spirit King summoned troubled creatures that were more peculiar than the previous ones. As the huge space doors opened, ginormous troubled creatures rushed out one after another. There were giant snakes with multiple heads, ghosts with long arms, spiders with several legs, and many others. Really, you think that these could make a difference? Zen glanced at all the creatures with a taunting expression on his face. Except for their obviously larger bodies, these troubled creatures were no stronger than the previous ones. Zen didn't even change his way of attacking. He just increased the number of invisible blades to slaughter these creatures. In no time, they were all cut to pieces. However, the Snake Spirit King didn't stop summoning these troubled creatures. More and more of them came in various forms and sizes, fearlessly rushing and sacrificing themselves. Then, there were millions of them. Tens of millions. Hundreds of millions. However, all these waves of black corpses were just purified by Zen. The downgrader would never succeed in contaminating the primitive land by just using the pollution extreme form. At the same time, Hilario had been observing in silence as Zen continued to slaughter the troubled creatures. Although the pollution extreme form was easily resolved by Zen, he still couldn't shake the feeling that there was something wrong going on. He clearly knew that the downgrader was an extremely intelligent being. There should be some meaning behind all these seemingly useless things that he was doing. Is he doing something while our attentions are focused on these creatures? Then, Hilario suddenly raised his head and looked at the corner of the burial land that pierced into the primitive land. It was just a small part with respect to the entirety of the burial land, but it was still quite huge. After all, the burial land was large enough to swallow two primitive lands. Swallow. Hilario realized something. His eyes instantly widened. Zen, project the image outside the primitive land. The real Zen, who was standing on the jadeite platform, looked at Hilario with furrowed brows but still did what he was told. As he pointed to the air, the image of the outside was projected on the jadeite platform. From there, they could clearly see the corner of the burial land that drilled into the primitive land. Is there something wrong? What do we need to see here? Kincaid asked as he was also a little confused with Hilario's sudden request. After studying the projected image, Hilario continued, Zen, can you try and push that corner out? I'm afraid that's difficult to do, Zen said while shaking his head. Doing so would actually be equivalent to lifting the entire burial land upwards. With Zen's current strength, he could easily prevent the burial land from invading further into the primitive land, but it would be difficult to completely get rid of it. He actually preferred to fight the downgrader head-on, but the latter had never shown himself. Just try it, Hilario insisted. Although Zen didn't really understand why Hilario was strongly suggesting he do it, he still followed and did his best to push the corner. With that, his avatar raised his hand. In an instant, the power of the entire primitive land was directed to that corner. Rumble, rumble. With the avatar's full power, the corner was slowly raised to a height, but it was quickly pressed down hard again. I can't do it. It's too heavy, Zen said as he turned to Hilario. Then, Hilario pointed at the image of the outside and said, even if it was just a little, you were able to lift the corner of the burial land, but the image didn't move one bit. It means that the image is fake. It's just an illusion created by the downgrader. Chapter 3869, Outside the Primitive Land. The collision of the burial land into the primitive land created a huge shockwave. Even though only a corner of the former had made contact, there was a loud noise and it attracted everyone's attention. At that very moment, Zen himself was busy killing the troubled creatures and purifying the energy of the pollution extreme form. Hearing Hilario's words, he realized that something was wrong and decided to find out what was going on. The best way to do that was to utilize the illusory vision of the soul extreme form. The consciousness created by the illusory vision quickly spread out in all directions and he began sensing everything that it touched. Its radius was increasing at an extremely fast speed, and in a very short period of time, it would have been able to reach the end of the chaos. However, before that could happen, the consciousness encountered an obstacle. As soon as it left the primitive land, it was completely absorbed by a mysterious force and vanished without a trace. How is that even possible? Zen almost shouted in shock. The consciousness had spread out in all possible directions. Even if it hit a barrier in one direction which captured and erased it, what about the consciousness in other directions? The primitive land was enormous in size now, which meant there was only one way that this could have happened. The primitive land needed to be wrapped up in something larger than itself for that consciousness to be completely absorbed. Wrapped up, Zen's heart began thumping at the thought. He looked up at the blood-red sky overhead and suddenly realized something, which darkened his face. Father, what's wrong? Jeffrey instantly noticed Zen's grim expression. Not only him, but the others did so as well. Zen didn't answer the question, though. He narrowed his eyes and created an avatar that appeared at the edge of the primitive land. Whoosh! The avatar reached out and placed his palm on the inner wall of the primitive land. This wall of the primitive land was extremely thick and generally considered impenetrable. This was the consequence of absorbing countless heads in the chaos. Even Eternal Realm warriors would not be able to break through it into the chaos. But this wasn't going to hinder Zen. Go! Zen's avatar spat out. Then, with a soft, fluid movement, the avatar went straight through the wall, quickly passed through it, and was outside. Logically speaking, the avatar should have been gazing into the empty chaos now. But instead, he saw large, black mountains standing in the distance. And somehow, these mountains were upside down, with their peaks touching the ground instead of towering above. Wah, wah, goo, coo, there were hundreds of troubled creatures on the black mountains. When they discovered the avatar, they immediately sensed that this was an extraordinary prey. They spread their wings and charged towards him. But even before the troubled creature in the front could approach him, a snow-white light had already shot into its chest. After drawing an arc in the air, the light returned back to the avatar's hand. This was a light shuttle, made up of the energy of the purification extreme form. The black matter in the body of the troubled creature faded away. It fell on the surface of the primitive land and died instantly as a result. Outside the primitive land, Zen's avatar couldn't use the omniscient power, which might be nothing but an annoyance at best. Dealing with these troubled creatures was still a piece of cake for him. The trouble was, the troubled creatures didn't know about fear, and even after one fell, they still swarmed towards Zen's avatar. However, the light shuttle went on rushing forwards like the sickle of death. After it had drawn numerous irregular curves in the air, hundreds of bodies were lying on the ground around Zen's avatar. Bang, 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 the corpses of the troubled creatures piled up beside him. However, the reason Zen's avatar had left the primitive land was not to kill these troubled creatures. He wanted to investigate and find out what was going on. He also had a theory he needed to verify. After killing over 1,000 troubled creatures in the chaos, he was planning on leaving and going to a place from where he could observe more. He stretched out a hand and clasped his thumb and index finger together. Calmly, he folded the space between him and his targeted area, and in the blink of an eye, he had moved several trillions of miles. Now, he was standing at the top of the primitive land. Just as he had reached there and was beginning to look around, a voice came from behind him. Good. Have one long look at this place. Your last look at it. This was the voice of the Snake Spirit King. Zen's avatar whirled around instantly, but there was nothing behind him. Before he had a chance to put up his guard, a thin tail had quietly wrapped itself around his throat and lifted him up. Swoosh. You're in my world now, and I rule this place. Zen's avatar was lifted up into the air by the tail, and saw the giant head of the Snake Spirit King in front of him. Inside the primitive land, the Snake Spirit King did not stand a chance against Zen, which was why the fight hadn't been too long. But now, the tables had turned, and it was Zen who had barged into the Snake Spirit King's territory. The snake tail changed direction as it seized Zen. Zen looked around and saw black mountains and troubled creatures everywhere. He was finally sure that he was inside the burial land now. His theory was right. The primitive land had been devoured by the burial land and no one had noticed. Ha ha, Zen's avatar sneered as the light shuttle in his hand quickly lengthened into a blazing white light sword. With a fierce slash, he cut off the slender snake tail that was choking him and turned around. In the blink of an eye, the light sword had been shot into the snake spirit king's mouth. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The sword released countless slender white lines inside the body of the snake spirit king. These lines themselves were also white in color and they forcefully sliced Zen's opponent into countless pieces. The huge snake body collapsed like a mountain that had lost its foundation and broke into pieces, falling down like confetti. The attack power of the Purification Extreme form was not too strong, but Zen wasn't actually facing the Snake Spirit King. Rather, what was in front of him was also an avatar, which meant that it was easy to face him. Buzz. A brand new snake appeared behind Zen instantly. This time, the avatar was about the same size as Zen himself. When the snake appeared, it wrapped itself around Zen's body. Then it raised its head, gazed into Zen's eyes, and asked in a malicious tone, "Can I be your opponent now?" "You, not a chance." The energy of the Destruction Extreme form suddenly burst out from Zen's body. It created 6 short, purple swords which circled around the snake's body and once again, Cornelius's avatar was slashed into countless pieces. Possessing energies from the various extreme forms, Zen was still extremely powerful even though it was his avatar who was fighting and he was outside the primitive land. As soon as this particular avatar was dismembered, a new avatar appeared like clockwork, once again wrapping itself around Zen's body. "It doesn't matter how many times you slice my avatar. This is a battle between 2 worlds. Once I devour your primitive land, then I'll see if you are as good as you think you are." The Snake Spirit King laughed, and hundreds of black spirals appeared in the inner space of the burial land. One of them landed on the surface of the primitive land and began spinning like a crazy top. Crack, 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 crack. The surface of the primitive land was remarkably sturdy, but when compared to the black spiral, it was as fragile as glass. It cracked rapidly, and every single thing, from the smallest grain of sand to the broadest of the mountains began falling off. The black spiral was only the size of a person, and the amount of matter it peeled off from the surface of the primitive land was pitifully small. In fact, what it did was almost negligible compared to the huge primitive land. However, there were trillions of these black spirals and each of them was spinning in various places. They had landed on the primitive land like locusts. Looking from afar, it was as if the surface of the primitive land had been covered with a layer of black gauze. The elements that formed the surface of the primitive land were quickly peeled off, separated into confetti, and then absorbed. After swallowing the primitive land in one huge gulp, the burial land was planning on digesting it bit by bit. Chapter 3870, The Final Announcement. The downgrader was very aggressive. From the moment he had released the needle, he had already planned every step ahead. Zen, on the other hand, followed a relatively conservative approach. He only fought back at whatever came at him. However, the downgrader was able to control the needle, thus he kept the initiative. Besides, he had gained a wealth of experience. He had been in the deep space for a long time, so he was much more proficient in the use of all kinds of extreme form energies. "Ha ha ha ha, I won't kill you. I'll let you watch as I devour your primitive land." The Snake Spirit King teased with a smug smile. He had a keen awareness of emotions and could sense Zen's despair. Zen stopped his counter-attacking. It was an exercise in futility to keep killing the Snake Spirit King's avatars in the burial land. He could only observe this scene silently. The size of each black spiral was comparatively quite small, and the speed of them devouring the primitive land was also limited. However, there were simply too many of them. If this continued, the primitive land wouldn't be able to last for too long. On the jadeite platform, everyone swept their eyes over anxiously. They sometimes studied Zen's real body, while also looking at the fake projection, trying to figure out what had happened. Not long after, Zen's real body finally moved. He gently flicked his finger, and the fake illusion that had been projected onto the jadeite platform disappeared. "Zen, what's going on?" Kincaid was the first to question the events. After a moment of silence, Zen explained, "We're already inside the burial land. The Snake Spirit King is maneuvering the burial land to devour the outer wall of the primitive land." Although everyone present had been mentally prepared, their faces still darkened after Zen confirmed their suspicions. "Then what can we do?" Yasamine asked in a low voice. This was a situation unlike any they had ever experienced. Even the snake goddess, who was extremely intelligent, was at a loss. Kincaid questioned, "Hilario, if one world is wrapped up in another world, how will the rules be changed?" Although the bold conjecture house had performed all sorts of strange experiments, the question Kincaid raised was an unpopular topic that few people would be interested in studying. If one primitive land wrapped up another primitive land, who would then be the real controller? Hilario was also stumped by the question. I haven't conducted any relevant research. I wonder if the other members of the bold conjecture house might have some experience. Wait for me, I'll go to the other shore. With those words, Hilario returned to the other shore. After half a minute, a descending ring flashed with a golden light. However, the one who descended was not Hilario, but a thin human spirit. Greetings, Master Kincaid. I'm Barth from the Bold Conjecture House. The human spirit named Barth saluted. Kincaid waved away formalities with his hand. You don't have to be so courteous. Can you answer my question? Barth nodded. I'm in charge of the research into the secondary worlds. I'm an expert in this field, so Master Hilario asked me to descend here. Back then. Get straight to the point. Kincaid rushed to cut him off from rambling. Given the critical situation, Barth was wasting time with nonsense, which left everyone speechless. I once created several primitive lands at the same time, observing as they merged and devoured each other. One of these test cases was similar to what you have encountered. A large primitive land devoured a small primitive land. Barth continued to unhurriedly explain. Kincaid, the snake goddess, and the others shared helpless looks on their faces, but they could only let him continue explaining in his meandering way. Zen, on the other hand, wore a look of concern. What will happen to me as the controller of the smaller primitive land once it is devoured? You will not be affected, said Barth with a smile. Your controlling force and the snake spirit kings will become integrated. What's interesting is that as a controller, you can even assert control over the burial land in turn. To put it bluntly, you and the Snake Spirit King will fight for control over the whole burial land. The winner will take all. Hearing this, the snake goddess couldn't help but blurt out, it wouldn't be advantageous for them, right? Barth responded with a smile, yes, it's a great disadvantage to them. It's simply stupid to do so. The Snake Spirit King and the Downgrader must have never done experiments of this nature. They mistakenly believe that they can control everything by devouring the primitive land, but in fact, the opposite is true. Although this thin man was verbose and rambling on, everyone became more patient to hear what he had to say. The situation remained critical, but there was now a chance to fight back. It was unclear who would win in the end, anyway. However, the primitive land was probably no longer a safe haven, and an unprecedented and fierce war was looming. The people on the Jadeite platform had already been mentally prepared, but this war involved countless innocent people, the people in the large cities on the Pear Hill, the people in the ruined graveyard, the people in the Divine Land, and even the people in various universes who knew nothing about the outside world. I want them to know the truth, so even if they die, they will know the reason, said Zen. What do you plan on doing? Asked Fuxi. Announce it to everyone. As he spoke, Zen tapped his tiptoe on the Jadeite platform and launched himself into the air. I'm Zen, the controller of this primitive land. Whether you hail from the Pear Hill, the ruined graveyard, the Divine Land, or the universes, you're all under my protection. While his voice did not have significant penetrating force, Zen had immediately activated the omniscient power, causing his voice to ring in everyone's ears. It was as if hundreds of trillions of Zens were whispering an explanation to countless people. At this moment, the primitive land has encountered a great crisis. A larger world has descended, and the primitive land will fall into turmoil. Everyone living within will have no way to escape. But I will do my best to protect you all. In the Divine Land, on the edge of the Time Sea. A girl with sad eyes looked up at the sky. She was Yolanda. She had asked Mike to take back a heavenly destiny. Although her cultivation level had returned to that of a world lord for a while, she broke through the shackles and became a true god, finally entering the Divine Land. When Zen's voice rang out, she felt as if she was in the evolutionary universe once more. At that time, Zen's voice had often echoed across the universe. In the evolutionary universe, the Supreme Lord of Original Sin, the Supreme Lord of Oracle, and the other Supreme Lords even thought that Zen had returned. They had been trying to communicate with Zen through the roaring tokens. In the Fairy Palace, inside the Pear Hill, humans, non-humans, and intelligent creatures all experienced different thoughts when they heard Zen's words. Many didn't believe what they heard, while some didn't care, others were sad, and many were crying. Whether they were willing or not, they were about to face an inevitable catastrophe. Once Zen returned to the Jadeite platform, he began to communicate with the ancestry-level bloodline. After the heavenly ring staff was taken back by Jeffrey, the ancestry-level bloodline took away the spirit in the staff, which was the crystal. The ancestry-level bloodline was trying to find its own memories in it. However, the process was not going smoothly. This crystal was in a completely sealed state. The ancestry-level bloodline feared damaging the crystal, so it did not dare to use too much power on the crystal. The outer wall of the primitive land will be broken. No matter what happens, you must return to my body first, said Zen. The ancestry-level bloodline accepted Zen's instructions without hesitation. The huge blood-red sky began to shrink, converging into an extremely thin blood pillar, and then it entered into Zen's body, taking with the crystal that belonged to the heavenly ring staff. Chapter 3871, Merging into One. After the ancestry-level bloodline went back to Zen's body, only 140 rings, which were the energies of the 140 extreme form energies floating in the sky. It was a little complicated to control the extreme form energies, so Zen created 140 avatars, each of which was responsible for one kind of energy. When he needed to use any of the energies, he would activate one of his avatars to control it. However, the primitive land was about to be captured, so he had to prevent the extreme form energies and the avatars from being destroyed. After thinking for a while, Zen gently raised his hand, and a mysterious power of space circulated his fingertip. After the avatar in charge of the hyperspace extreme form opened his eyes, a space began to envelop all of the energies and the avatars. Shrink, Zen commanded. Swoosh, the space began to shrink. The 140 kinds of energies as well as the avatars also shrank with it, until finally, they all landed on Zen's palm. He looked at the space on his palm and heaved a sad sigh. After he put the space away, Zen's gaze swept across everyone present. Everyone there all had mixed feelings. They thought back to the start of the war in the source world to their successful escape. The steps they had to take to reach this moment were not easy at all. The end of the chaos was not worth mentioning now. What they had to focus on now was facing the Snake Spirit King and the Downgrader. Fuxi said with a wide smile, even if we lose, it will all be worth it. There were so many civilizations before us, but none of them were able to experience what we experienced. I had never thought of fighting against such powerful enemies before. If I had known about the force we were about to face today a lot earlier, I'm afraid I would have given up on day one, Eastern Emperor Tai said expressionlessly. It's not just you. I didn't think I'd ever reach this point, either, Hilario replied, shaking his head. While they seemed to be full of fighting spirit, in their hearts, the feeling of despair quietly began to grow. It was like they had worked so hard to hike up a mountain, only to reach its peak and realize there was still a dangerous ladder they had to climb. It was difficult for them not to feel despair, especially when their previous efforts seemed to be for nothing. Kincaid, however, was having none of it. Wait, why do you guys think that we're going to be the ones who will lose? He spoke up. Let's not forget, whatever the Downgrader has, we have it too. If that's the case, why are you guys so sure he's going to win? He continued. Master Kincaid's right. Also, Zen controls the extreme form energies. As the controllers of the primitive lands, they are equally matched in strength. More importantly, we have something that they don't have, the snake goddess exclaimed. Zen asked in astonishment, what do you mean? Listen to me first. Ignoring Zen's and everyone else's puzzled expressions, the snake goddess continued, the human spirit called Barth said that when a big primitive land devours a small primitive land, the former wouldn't have any advantages. The controllers of the two primitive lands have the same authority, right? Yes, Zen confirmed. The Snake Spirit King and the Downgrader definitely don't know about this. If they did, they wouldn't have chosen to devour your primitive land, the snake goddess continued to explain. Zen thought about it for a while before nodding his head in agreement. The snake goddess analysis made perfect sense. When the two worlds merge into one world, your omniscient and omnipotent power will meet no obstruction in the burial land. You can find out the Snake Spirit King in an instant and kill him. The snake goddess exclaimed. As Fuxi, Kincaid, and the others heard the snake goddess' suggestion, their eyes lit up with hope. But it was quickly turned down by Hilario, who said, Cornelius is in the form of a treacherous being. It will not be easy to kill him. As Hilario said, the reason why treacherous beings were so terrifying to face in combat was that it was extremely difficult to kill them. Even if one used the light of annihilation to kill the treacherous beings, the latter would still be able to revive themselves through their coordinates. If Zen used the flame extreme form, he didn't need to use the light of annihilation. He could directly burn the Snake Spirit King to death. He had already done it once on the other shore, but the question was this, how could he remove the Snake Spirit King's coordinates? It shouldn't be difficult to find his coordinates with your omniscient power, the snake goddess said, her brain still swiftly racing. Yes, If his coordinates are in the burial land, there might be a good chance I can kill him, Zen said, growing more hopeful. But what if his coordinates aren't in the burial land but on the other shore? Hilario asked again. Now, everyone fell into silence. It wouldn't be easy to find the Snake Spirit King's coordinates if they were on the other shore. Ha ha, Kincaid laughed suddenly, breaking the silence. Cornelius is a very cautious person. I'm afraid he wouldn't want to be separated from his coordinates. There's a high chance of him bringing his coordinates to the burial land, but still, we can't be 100% sure we'll win this war. All we can do is try. Forget the 100% chance of winning. Even if the chance is slim, we still have to go on to fight. Zen said, punching his fist into the air. Outside the primitive land, Zen's avatar was still tightly held by the Snake Spirit King. He looked down. When the black spirals eroded the primitive land, they might have absorbed a portion of the matter that fell off from the primitive land. These black spirals grew stronger and stronger each minute. As a result, the speed at which they eroded the outer wall of the primitive land grew quicker and quicker. It was as if they were peeling off a fruit, grinding the primitive land's outer wall bit by bit. This might take a longer time, but it was the safest plan in the eyes of the Snake Spirit King and the Downgrader. On a peak of the burial land stood the Snake Spirit King's real body, and on his head stood the Downgrader. We're at an absolute advantage with this strategy. The source world has been smashed into pieces. Congratulations. You've won the battle earlier than we expected, the Snake Spirit King said, praising the Downgrader. However, the Downgrader's 6 pairs of light blue, compound eyes were not celebrating. Instead, his eyes looked bored. Well, it is a little boring, he said, trailing off. What do you mean? The Snake Spirit King asked in surprise. I've fought against Clarence countless times, and every battle with him was fierce. I did my best whenever I was battling him, but I always failed to take him down. Now that I fight with these weak existences, there is no challenge in it for me. I can't help but find this all boring, the Downgrader said, shaking his head in disappointment. Clarence, who was he? The Snake Spirit King asked cautiously. The Downgrader scoffed. You are not qualified to know, he said coldly. Although the Snake Spirit King cursed in his heart, he didn't dare to say anything about it. 4 hours later, 1/5 of the primitive land's outer wall had been eroded. 6 hours later, half of the primitive land's outer wall had been eroded. 10 hours later, the once thick wall of primitive land became thin. It had only about 1/10 of its original thickness. At this time, the Snake Spirit King released an aura smelling like blood, which spread to every corner of the burial land. Splash! When the troubled creatures of the land smelled the blood, they followed it like they were hungry sharks. They flapped their wings and surrounded the huge primitive land. They waited. When the outer wall of the primitive land was completely eroded, they would rush towards it. Desperate, the Snake Spirit King's avatar asked. Ha ha, Zen's avatar sneered, refusing to entertain him. Looking at all the troubled creatures surrounding the primitive land, he couldn't help but think of what the snake goddess mentioned. The Snake Spirit King and the Downgrader didn't know that when the boundary was broken, the two primitive lands would merge into one. They weren't aware of the consequence of what they were doing. Another hour later, the outer wall of the primitive land cracked. Countless holes and crevices began to appear. The rest of the broken shell was completely eroded by the black spirals until finally, the two worlds merged. Swoosh! We've succeeded, they cheered. At this moment, the Snake Spirit King felt a lot of information rush into his mind. Before, the primitive land was like a locked, black box to him. He couldn't open it up or see through it. Now, it was as transparent as water. He looked at it intensely as his mind absorbed endless details. His omniscient ability finally extended to Zen's primitive land. However, what the Snake Spirit King didn't know was that Zen felt the same way about the burial land. Chapter 3872, Assault. The entirety of the burial land now came into Zen's view. From the specific number of the troubled creatures, to the huge jars that were used to nurture troubled creatures at the bottom of the Black Mountain. Zen could see it all. He could even sense the horde of troubled creatures swarming over to the primitive land, their minds filled with craziness, restlessness, and strong killing intent. However, Zen had no interest in them. Instead, he focused on finding the location of the Snake Spirit King's coordinates. Buzz! In the blink of an eye, the figures of the Snake Spirit King and the Downgrader appeared in his mind's eye. While the two of them both had an acute sense of perception, they didn't notice Zen's watchful eye. If it were anyone else, they'd have found out immediately, but Zen's state of omniscience was different. As opposed to spying, this omniscience let him know everything about anything in a single thought. The Downgrader, and the Snake Spirit King. I've found them now, Zen said to the others. However, this still wasn't what he was looking for. The Snake Spirit King's coordinates. In his state of omniscience, nothing in the burial land could remain secret to him. As long as Zen thought about it, he would instantly get the answer. His mind was quickly directed to the bottom of a mountain. There, he saw the Snake Spirit King's coordinates, which were encased in an orb of black light. Additionally, a golden ring surrounded the black orb. Buzz. Zen shot a quick glance to the others and gave them a comforting nod before abruptly teleporting to the Snake Spirit King's coordinates. However, he did leave a replica of himself before he left. Shortly after, the Snake Spirit King set foot on the Pear Hill. His huge body slowly coiled up onto the peak. All the while, he hissed proudly. He didn't even bother to hide his complacency in his golden eyes as he revealed himself before everyone. Panic, fear, and uneasiness, he exclaimed elatedly. I feed off of your negative emotions. What he said was true. The eyes of the snake goddess, Kincaid, Hilario, and everyone else were filled with anxiety. However, their uneasiness actually stemmed from fear that Zen's movements would be found out. Whatever the case was, their panicked expressions worked like a charm to delude the proud Snake Spirit King. The Snake Spirit King was so carried away that he couldn't be bothered to check if the Zen before him was just a replica, nor did he even use his omniscient power to read their minds. He believed that everything was well under his control. Kincaid, Zen, Hilario, and Itzel. None of them would be able to change anything. There was no longer any chance for these weaklings to turn the tide, he firmly believed. My foolish daughter, did things go as you wished? The Snake Spirit King sneered, directing his forked tongue at Itzel. Standing at the corner of the jadeite platform, Itzel stared coldly at her father, disgust written all over her face. Might I remind you, Father, she snapped back, your wishes haven't been fulfilled, either. How pathetic. How dare you? The fact that he failed to upgrade the world was a terrible blow to the Snake Spirit King's ego. Although he had already tried to accept it as fact, he still felt furious and embarrassed when Itzel pointed it out. Unable to suppress his anger, he opened his huge mouth in an attempt to swallow her whole. Kincaid, Hilario, and Rocher all immediately sprang into action, ready to strike back. However, before they could even get close, a strong, burly figure had already stepped forward. Before the Snake Spirit King could react, Jeffrey had closed in on him in a heartbeat and swung his large fist at the Snake Spirit King's body. Pop! A light muffled sound rang out, as though Jeffrey had hit a piece of cotton. However, the power that erupted from his blow was extremely terrifying. The huge body of the Snake Spirit King caved in upon impact, and the power even penetrated through his body. An energy wave strong enough to distort the space within tens of thousands of miles rippled out, influencing even the troubled creatures that had just set foot onto the primitive land. Despite them being so far away, these creatures were still blown away, losing their balance. Clatter. After the punch was landed, the Snake Spirit King's body instantly disintegrated into ashes. Everyone who had witnessed this scene was stunned into silence. After Jeffrey had returned from his long journey, he was known to have undergone a drastic change. Once when he had sparred with Rocher, his power had surprised everyone. However, he now displayed even greater power that was far beyond everyone's imagination. Let me protect you all, Jeffrey said with a smile as he waved his huge fist. After returning to the chaos, he hadn't yet used his strength to its full potential. His body was, after all, the strongest physical body in the deep space, and its power was so great that even he himself was startled. This great power boosted his confidence, he was a different person now. Buzz. Moments later, a new Snake Spirit King appeared before them. He hissed in frustration, shooting an annoyed glance at Jeffrey. I must admit, what a strong force. You really surprised me. Narrowing his eyes at Jeffrey, he continued, but that doesn't matter, it won't make a difference. Do you really think you can defeat me? He sneered disdainfully. Bang! As soon as he finished speaking, Jeffrey materialized in front of him once more and punched him right on his forehead. His body was powerful enough to transcend the restraints of space. To a certain extent, his movements were beyond the Snake Spirit King's prediction, regardless of his omniscience. The Snake Spirit King's body was once again blown to smithereens. However, what Jeffrey killed was only another avatar. As long as the Snake Spirit King wanted, he could create thousands of such avatars. Buzz. Once the avatar was killed, the Snake Spirit King summoned a new one to take its place, which was then killed by Jeffrey again. It became an endless cycle of summoning and killing. This scene soon became too much for the others to take in. As they watched in awe, Kincaid and the rest did not try to interfere. Jeffrey's intentions were clear. he wanted to distract the Snake Spirit King with his incredible strength so that Zen would have enough time to complete his mission. Speaking of Zen, as Jeffrey continued to kill the Snake Spirit King's avatars, he had quietly appeared at the foot of a mountain, which was only several feet away from the Snake Spirit King's coordinates. Zen frowned. He had planned to appear right in front of the coordinates. With his omnipotence, it should have been easy for him to achieve that. However, there was something special about the golden ring, which blocked him from doing so. Although his teleportation had been disturbed by the golden ring, this distance was close enough for him. Shrugging it off, he decided to proceed immediately. If the Snake Spirit King noticed something was amiss and tried to find out where Zen was, his current location would immediately be exposed to his enemies. In fact, the Snake Spirit King only needed to check what the people on the Jadeite platform were thinking to know what their plan was. Destruction Extreme Form. A circle of purple energy formed in front of Zen, from which a spear quickly materialized. Grasping the spear firmly in his hand, he jabbed forward towards his target. Bang! The long spear stabbed into the surface of the golden ring and made a harsh, crisp sound. The golden ring trembled, and several cracks appeared on its edge. It's not destroyed. Oh no, Zen had expected he would penetrate through the golden ring and shatter the coordinates in one blow. Never in his wildest dreams would he have imagined this ordinary-looking golden ring would withstand the destruction extreme form energy. However, he quickly gathered his bearings. Withdrawing the long spear, he quickly landed another blow. Simultaneously, he summoned two replicas beside him. Meanwhile, from the top of the mountain, the Snake Spirit King and the Downgrader had all their attention focused on Jeffrey. Jeffrey's strong body was definitely something beyond their expectations, and consequently they had been caught off guard. It seemed Jeffrey's plan was working, as they had failed to shift their attention away from him. This young man's body is incredibly strong. Moreover, I can feel that his soul is equally strong. If I wasn't connected to the burial land, I would be no match for him. Why is there such a powerful warrior in the primitive land? Is this a result of the extreme form energy? The Snake Spirit King inquired. The Downgrader shook his head. He was the one who brought back the heavenly ring staff. He must have obtained a great fortune in the deep space. Both his physical body and soul are the strongest in the deep space. It's normal that you are not a match for him. It's a pity such strength will go to waste, the Snake Spirit King said complacently, a smile creeping on his face. Don't slacken your vigilance. They've grasped the extreme form energies. It's not worth mentioning to me, but... Before the Downgrader could finish his sentence, his 6 pairs of eyes suddenly flashed with a red light, and uneasiness emanated from him. Chapter 3873, Indestructible. The Downgrader's eyes suddenly widened in realization. He discovered that the golden ring was under attack, and it already got damaged. The golden ring, also known as the narrow steel ring in the deep space, was an immensely powerful defensive treasure invented by a genius of the Cinnabar race. Even the Downgrader was amazed when he first saw it. He was awed by the inventor's wisdom and the fact that he managed to create such a powerful treasure with the extreme form energy. After the Downgrader had obtained the irregular heavy sword, he used the extreme form energy to build the narrow steel ring. However, it was a pity that he was not in the deep space right now. That was because the creation of narrow steel rings required some specific techniques and materials from the deep space. Therefore, the Downgrader could only make a simplified version. Yet, although he had only made a simplified narrow steel ring, it still had a spectacular defensive ability. It should have been impossible to damage it with just a single blow. What's wrong? The Snake Spirit King asked curiously. He could not understand why the Downgrader felt worried when everything was well under their control. Someone is trying to destroy your coordinates and my source light, the Downgrader answered. What? But how could that happen? The Snake Spirit King said in disbelief while he subconsciously began to think about the possible answers. As he did so, his omniscient abilities immediately conveyed all the relevant information to him. It included the inner thoughts of the people on the Jadeite platform, the reason why Jeffrey continued to attack his avatars in vain, as well as Zen's current location. As the information flashed in his mind, he saw Zen, who thrust a purple spear towards the golden ring. After he did that, numerous cracks appeared on the ring's surface. Bang! With a crisp sound, the cracks immediately spread to the entire body of the narrow steel ring. If Zen thrust the spear once more, the narrow steel ring would undoubtedly break into pieces. Stop! The Snake Spirit King yelled, his face blanched in fright. He quickly attempted to teleport himself beside Zen to block the spear. The Downgrader's reflexes were much faster than the Snake Spirit King's. However, he needed a longer time to use the grand teleportation technique, since the burial land had been handed over to the Snake Spirit King. As a result, they did things almost simultaneously. Just as both of them were about to teleport away at the same time, two avatars of Zen suddenly appeared behind them. Exile. In a split second, two cubic spaces enveloped the Downgrader and the Snake Spirit King. Buzz. They felt their heads spin for a moment, then they got sent out of the burial land at the same time and found themselves floating somewhere else in the chaos. What? In turn, the Downgrader's 6 pairs of compound eyes instantly turned bright red. He quickly understood the situation and spiraled into a flurry of emotions. It's Zen. He could control the burial land. It was not until the Snake Spirit King got kicked out of the burial land that he realized what happened. Stop him, my avatar. Since they got sent quite far away, it was not easy for the Snake Spirit King to go back. Thus, he immediately created an avatar beside Zen. But before his avatar could stop Zen, the purple spear which was formed from the destruction extreme form energy had already stabbed the narrow steel ring. Bang! Covered in cracks, the narrow steel ring finally broke apart at that one thrust. As a defensive treasure, it was already impressive enough to have withstood 3 blows of the destruction extreme form energy before it finally shattered. However, the long spear did not stop even after it broke the narrow steel ring. Next, it pierced through the black orb of light and punctured the coordinates. Crack! The moment the coordinates, which were 2 golden crosses, came into contact with the destruction extreme form energy, they instantly turned into a heap of fine golden powder. The poor Snake Spirit King had sensed everything through his connection to the burial land. He even knew how many pieces his coordinates had broken into, but he could not stop it from happening. He could only watch helplessly in a daze. If he could not do anything, then what use were his omniscient abilities? Help! Help me! On the brink of death, the Snake Spirit King desperately asked the Downgrader for help. You died of stupidity, the Downgrader only remarked mockingly. The Snake Spirit King failed to finish his sentence, as his body slowly became snow-white in color, then a translucent shade. Eventually, he completely disappeared from the Downgrader's vision. The chief culprit behind the destruction of the main world and the one who had brought the 4-spirit sect to its end finally died in this way. After he died, his avatars could no longer move, as if they had lost their souls. Meanwhile, Zen stretched out his hand and stabbed the avatar's body with the purple spear, which blasted it into pieces. His lips curved into a relieved smile. On the Jadeite platform, the Snake Spirit King's avatars originally kept forming in succession before Jeffrey quickly killed them. Just as Jeffrey began to worry that his physical strength could not hold on for longer, the avatars suddenly stopped appearing. Did Zen succeed? Or did the Snake Spirit King just give up wasting his time fighting with Jeffrey? A moment of silence later, everyone turned to look at Zen's avatar. They knew this avatar was connected to Zen's consciousness. Zen, how's it going now? The Snake Goddess asked. Everyone on the Jadeite platform went silent and eagerly waited for Zen's avatar to answer. The avatar paused for a few seconds before the corners of his mouth curved up into a smile. I have removed the Snake Spirit King's coordinates, he said. Kincaid, Hilario, the Snake Goddess, Jeffrey, Roche, and the human hero's energy souls all felt stunned for a moment, then they jumped in joy. He really made it. It was easier than I expected. As the saying goes, the smarter one will win in an inevitable confrontation. Because they were both world rulers, this fight quickly yielded results. The crux of the battle between the world rulers lay on seizing the advantage of time. It was especially important for Zen to have obtained the most crucial information from Barth, and the Snake Goddess' suggestion was no less significant. As the others celebrated, Itzel looked relaxed. Her father, who had remained one of her worst nightmares, was finally gone. Her curse that had lasted for over 1,000 chaotic eras came to an end at last. While everyone basked in their excitement, Zen added, although his coordinates have gotten destroyed, the orb of black light still exists. I can't eliminate it. Everyone on the Jadeite platform felt very optimistic already, but their happiness did not last long when Zen pointed out the graver issue. Then, they became serious once again. They had not forgotten the fact that the Downgrader remained their biggest threat. At the bottom of the mountain, different rings flashed in Zen's palms one after another. He tried every kind of extreme form energy in succession, but none of them worked to affect the black light. Whoosh! A white ring released a blazing beam of light, which melted the entire mountain right away. However, the black light was still undamaged. Zen, why don't you try to exclude that entire area from the land? The Snake Goddess advised his avatar, who was on the Jadeite platform. At that moment, Zen's eyes lit up as a blue ring materialized in front of him. Hyperspace Extreme Form, Buzz. A space of 10 miles in length, width, and height appeared in a particular area. This space was completely isolated from the primitive land. Exile. Zen tried to exile everything in this specific space, including the black light. Theoretically, this entire space should have gotten exiled into somewhere else in the chaos. However, the black light still floated in its original position and did not even move an inch at all. A headache began to brew in Zen's head. This thing was a tougher challenge than he had imagined. Ancestry-level bloodline. Do you have any idea? He asked helplessly. Although the ancestry-level bloodline had been busy dealing with the crystal, it had also paid attention to Zen's movements. Of course, it had also noticed the black light earlier. When we were in the Jade Pure realm, I noticed something familiar in this orb of black light, said the ancestry-level bloodline. What's it? Zen asked hurriedly. I can't tell. My relevant memories were lost. Perhaps we can find the answer in the crystal, the ancestry-level bloodline answered. All right. While Zen communicated with the ancestry-level bloodline, his eyes remained transfixed on the black light. As he looked closely at it, he began to feel a strange sensation. He felt as if someone was staring back at him in the black light. The second he was about to speak, he heard the downgrader's laughter from within the black light. Ha ha, have you found me? You have sharper eyes than I thought. Chapter 3874, Tools. As the downgrader floated in the chaos, his 6 pairs of compound eyes shone a bright, flashing orange. He sized up Zen. When Zen noticed the downgrader, he was not threatened at all. If anything, he merely mocked him with a chuckle. However, Zen's heart sank as he heard the downgrader's words. It seemed that he did not care about the death of the Snake Spirit King, which was not a good sign. It turns out that I can't control the primitive land by devouring it directly. When a large primitive land devours a small one, this leaves the 2 controllers to have the same power. The Snake Spirit King is really a good-for-nothing bastard. You must have known this secret and made plans accordingly, the downgrader nagged. But because you were born in this chaos, you have limited knowledge. I can only assume that someone from the Bold Conjecture House told you this. The downgrader always had a better understanding of nature than anyone else. With ease, he could quickly come up with the most accurate guesses and answers. Meanwhile, Zen intently stared into the black light as he felt a great pressure of energy from it. When he was in the Jade Pure realm, he hadn't known the downgrader well. However, he had enough confidence to put up a fight against the downgrader and almost win. Now that Kincaid had woken up and Jeffrey had returned with the heavenly ring staff, he gradually realized that the downgrader was more complex than he seemed. Even if he disposed of the Snake Spirit King, it seemed that everything was still in the palm of the downgrader. So what? Zen asked. Your resistance is notable and surprises me, but the effort you make is in vain, the downgrader pointed out. In vain? Zen's eyebrows ruffled as he pulled himself together. Don't forget that I am now the owner of the burial land. I also have the extreme form energies of the deep space while you are all alone. It seemed that Zen had the upper hand and he shouldn't fear the downgrader anymore. Ha ha ha, the downgrader roared with frightening cackles and shrieks. Your present struggle reminds me so much of the sacred spirit race. They were born as indestructible stone tablets. Would you like to guess how they planned to defeat me? Zen looked at the ground, not saying a word. The downgrader nodded and continued. They united as one and grew together to form a huge stone cage that trapped me within. It's a pity you weren't able to witness it. It was truly an unprecedented big move. Though the power of the 6th grade world is far weaker compared to that of the 7th grade and 8th grade worlds, they were persistent and determined all throughout, which resulted to a very cruel ending. What happened to them? Zen couldn't help but ask. Oh, they turned from stone tablets to tombstones. Ha ha ha, the downgrader let out a merciless laugh. When I injured Clarence in the 5th grade world, I won. That says a lot, because in this world, only Clarence can stop me. And you're just materials and tools. All brawn and no brain. We still have our own intelligence, Zen defended with his eyebrows raised. No, you don't. The downgrader looked down and shook his head. Your intelligence is too low. Undeniably, it is impressive that you have reached this point, but like I said before, you are all tools. Without Clarence, you are nothing. You have no idea how funny it is to see you explore the chaos like chickens with their heads cut off. He said with a tone of revulsion, as if Zen's small, shallow understanding disgusted him. Without Clarence, we can also win. Otherwise, why did you attach yourself to the Snake Spirit King all these years? Zen retorted. He was definitely not going to back down on such argument. Clarence lost his memory in the deep space while I lost my strength. Since then, it became extremely difficult for me to downgrade the worlds. As he spoke, he stretched out his slender arms and the parts of the irregular heavy sword appeared one by one, slowly piecing themselves together. Now that I've regained my strength, everything is different. He smiled, let me show you how to properly use this weapon. Buzz. Just then, the cracks across the heavy sword began to flicker with a bright light. Oddly enough, the light was not monochrome, it was colorful. Within the sword, various extreme form energies quickly switched around. Swoosh. At the same time, Zen felt a sudden change within the burial land. Troubled creatures. Before, when the Snake Spirit King used black vortexes to get rid of the outer wall of the primitive land, he ordered the troubled creatures to attack. That was when a vast number of troubled creatures swarmed to the primitive land from all directions, attacking left and right. However, Zen's primitive land had expanded a lot. This brought about a long distance between the outer wall to the Pear Hill and the ruin graveyard in the center. It would take the troubled creatures quite a long time to get there. Once he controlled the burial land, Zen ignored the troubled creatures so they safely continued to fly in the void. If one looked closely from the farthest corner of the burial land, they would easily spot a number of troubled creatures huddled together like a black ball as they moved towards the center. All of a sudden, blue bands of light appeared on the bodies of the troubled creatures. Simultaneously, their bodies increased in size as the black ball moved even quicker than before. Realizing that something was wrong, Zen appeared in the center of the burial land and immediately sent a message as the controller. All of you, return. Now. Because the troubled creatures were born in the burial land, they were completely under Zen's control. The creatures were determined to get to their goal and quickened their pace. However, the moment they heard Zen's message, they stopped in their tracks and flowed backwards. The ball they formed expanded as they made their way back. Splash. Just then, black flames appeared at the center of the burial land too. With the irregular heavy sword in his hand, the downgrader roared his order, kill everything you see. That is an order. When the troubled creatures heard this, they roared once again and charged forward. At the hands of the downgrader, they actually disobeyed Zen's order without hesitation. The downgrader looked at Zen with a grin across his face. Look how weak your power is. What kind of controller are you? He mocked. Zen's face darkened at the downgrader's words. These troubled creatures can't withstand even a single blow. What is it to you if you can control them? Without a second thought, Zen released 1,000 avatars. When he'd used an avatar before, the avatar wiped out 100 million troubled creatures. Though the creatures were enormous, they were still considerably weak in battle. This time was different, and it went beyond any of Zen's expectations. As one of the avatars rushed towards the troubled creatures, he released invisible blades from his body. However, before the blades approached the troubled creatures, their bodies fluctuated. They charged and tore the avatar into pieces. Likewise, they did the same to the other avatars before them. Within seconds, all the avatars were ripped apart by the troubled creatures, which puzzled Zen even more. His best counterattack stood absolutely no chance. I made a few light changes to them. Do you like it? The downgrader said, smiling down at Zen. Chapter 3875, Infinity. Zen looked at the densely packed troubled creatures with disbelief. These troubled creatures that were previously weak like ants had suddenly turned as terrifying as beasts. You could change all the troubled creatures? Zen asked, staring at the downgrader with wide eyes. Of course, the downgrader replied. It seemed that he had long anticipated this question, and he said indifferently, I just gave them the hyperspace extreme form, making them more free. Taking a deep breath, Zen closed his eyes and quickly got a number. 76,619,334,481. This was the number of troubled creatures. You could give this many troubled creatures the extreme form energy? Zen asked again as he still couldn't believe it. Of course, the downgrader replied calmly. No way, no one can do that. Zen argued, refusing to accept his answer. With a wave of his hand, 3,000 avatars appeared and surrounded him. As soon as these avatars popped up, they immediately used the grand teleportation to rush towards the troubled creatures. The result was the same as what happened before. After the avatars appeared around the troubled creatures, they were like innocent sheep being mercilessly thrown into a vicious tiger's mouth. They were instantly slaughtered and torn apart. In just half a minute, all 3,000 avatars died. The direction in which these avatars used the grand teleportation was completely random, which meant that the downgrader didn't lie about his claim. He had truly bestowed the hyperspace extreme form on tens of billions of troubled creatures. How did you do it? It's impossible. Zen's voice sounded of a hint of bitterness. The downgrader had indeed done something he couldn't imagine. The consumption of the energy was tremendous, and the primitive land wasn't capable of continuously supplying it. For example, the evil god possessed all the extreme form energies, but he usually didn't dare to activate such energies because the source world couldn't provide enough energy for him. Zen had the ancestry-level bloodline, so he had more energy than the evil god. The ancestry-level bloodline had limitless energy that could supply about 10 people with extreme form energy at the same time. This was already remarkable and impressive. Yet, the downgrader could supply tens of billions of troubled creatures with extreme form energy all at the same time. He was countless times more powerful than the ancestry-level bloodline. In comparison, the energy of the ancestry-level bloodline came out as a ridiculous joke. The downgrader observed Zen's expression, and there was a bit of mockery in his intense glare. You think it's impossible because the energy of the ancestry-level bloodline has been enough to make you proud and even laugh so arrogantly until this turning point. Do you think the ancestry-level bloodline can provide energy as infinite as a river? Ironically, a river's length is infinite but its width is limited. I'm afraid that's not the real infinity. This is what real infinity looks like, the downgrader said, raising the irregular heavy sword in his hand. Buzz. Purple energy started to flash from each of the cracks of the irregular heavy sword. This was the destruction extreme form. At the same time, the eyes of all the troubled creatures turned into purple. They were all infused with the energy of the destruction extreme form. If the extreme form energy burst out all at the same time, it would be enough to destroy the huge burial land hundreds of times. Real infinity refers to infinite length, infinite width, and infinite size. There isn't a single limit to this word. The voice of the downgrader resonated with some kind of magic power. Every word he uttered was a heavy punch to Zen's heart, making him tremble. Why can't I do this? Zen asked. Why? The downgrader chuckled as he seemed to have heard a joke. I've already said that you're just a tool, not a person who uses the tool. I guess you don't understand the meaning of infinity at all. This is the limit of your life, Zen. As you said, I am a tool. But the ancestry-level bloodline has its consciousness. Why can't it do this, either? Zen asked again as he was losing his patience. The downgrader, who was so sure of winning, dealt with him very patiently. He continued to explain, it had inadvertently obtained its consciousness. It's also just a tool. Zen fell silent for a while. The ancestry-level bloodline didn't refute even as it heard these words. I don't believe it, Zen growled as flames suddenly appeared in his eyes. Circles of light then began to appear above his head. 7 kinds of extreme form energy exploded in alternating turns, strengthening his body like crazy. In order to fight this battle, Zen had tried to strengthen himself with extreme form energies and trained both day and night. These 7 kinds of extreme form energy were indeed the most effective. His body expanded rapidly, turning him into a height of 10 feet. Precious crystals appeared on the surface of his body that made him look like an enormous glass man. A pair of blue wings unfolded from his wide back, and finally, a purple sword appeared in his hand which he gripped tightly. The downgrader saw the changes in Zen, but he remained composed. He then raised the irregular heavy sword horizontally. The probability extreme form. Zen let out a roar that shook the whole area. A large cloud formed above him and the downgrader and started to envelop them. Zen summoned 1,000 avatars, and so did the downgrader. Boom, 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 boom. The long purple sword, which was transformed from the destruction extreme form, and the irregular heavy sword collided with each other repeatedly, bursting out the power of destruction each time. In the blink of an eye, they had already clashed for more than 10,000 times. The entire cloud was filled with powerful energy. Any ordinary Eternal Realm warriors would have disappeared in such an environment in an instant. You don't have to be shamed into anger, the downgrader said as he easily withstood all of Zen's attacks. Clarence and I have used more than 10 million tools. In fact, you are the best among the rest. You are the tool. Go to hell. Zen's sword attack became even more powerful as he was consumed by his rage. Boom! The energy of the destruction extreme form exploded, igniting a huge purple flame that surrounded the downgrader. After the purple flame dissipated, the downgrader came out unscathed. I'm praising you. But before he could finish his words, Zen struck him again. The purple flame engulfed the downgrader once more. Because of the cloud, the people on the jadeite platform couldn't see the battle between Zen and the downgrader, but they saw the troubled creatures rapidly approaching. The speed of these troubled creatures is unimaginably fast. It's very strange, Kincaid said as he was the first to notice that something was wrong. Well, they seem to be much stronger than before, Hilario said as he observed. Zen, what's happening? The snake goddess asked as she stared at Zen's avatar on the jadeite platform. Of course, Zen's avatar knew the reason. He hesitated whether he should tell everyone the cruel truth or not. After thinking for a while, he said, all the troubled creatures are given the energy of the hyperspace extreme form by the downgrader. All the troubled creatures? Hilario's eyes widened. Do you mean that every troubled creature has the energy of hyperspace extreme form? Are you serious? Hilario stared at Zen in shock, clearly in suspicion. There are a total of about 70 billion troubled creatures, and each of them is bestowed with the hyperspace extreme form. At the same time, their bodies are also infused with the energy of the destruction extreme form, Zen's avatar narrated in a dry tone. How is that possible? You must be lying, Fuxi said as his voice trembled. He was confused at everything that Zen's avatar said. Chapter 3876, Infinite Treatment. Nobody dared to look down upon the downgrader. If he was able to downgrade the worlds, then that meant he was extremely powerful. Surely though, there was a limit to his strength. The power he just exhibited exceeded everyone's expectations and filled their bodies with despair. How could he be so powerful? It wasn't a lie, he truly has real, infinite energy, Zen's avatar muttered, trying his best to remain calm. The real infinity, the snake goddess smiled in self-mockery. If that is the case then resistance is futile. All numbers meant nothing with regards to the real definition of infinity. It was once said that the truth was controlled by 6 chaos ancient gods, however, the infinite energy displayed by the downgrader is the absolute truth. This is power with no restrictions. Gerald could only sigh. All hope that remained in their hearts had been quashed by this revelation. It wasn't just them, even the energy souls that floated around the civilization artifact also felt dejected. They had sacrificed themselves yet in the end, it was all for naught. But, don't you still want to give it a try? Jeffrey asked. His voice had been loud and everyone on the Jadeite platform heard him. Jeffrey's words triggered something in them. Kincaid, who had previously also lost hope, raised his head. You're right, despair is meaningless. Since we cannot escape death, then we must at least face it head-on in battle. My dream has been completed. Even if I die, I will have no regrets, Itzel seconded. Quote. With just a few hopeful words, the morale on the Jadeite platform rose exponentially. A blue ring of light appeared in the hand of Zen's avatar, which contained the energy of the hyperspace extreme form. Zen, why? Roche asked, having felt the mysterious power of space. You may be stronger than the troubled creatures but the fact remains that they have the hyperspace extreme form. Other than Jeffrey, nobody else would be able to touch them. Allow me to help you offset their advantage, Zen's avatar replied. Even if Zen's avatars were stronger than everyone present on the platform, the troubled creatures had no problem slaying every single one. This was because the troubled creatures were endowed with the hyperspace extreme form, which rendered them uncatchable. The only way to resist was to reduce this advantage. Zen's avatars could create a large area wherein everyone could muster the strength to fight back. Zen's heart, however, was clear. He knew that resistance was futile as they were faced against about 70 billion troubled creatures with the hyperspace and destruction extreme forms. There was no winning this fight. Buzz. One of his avatars suddenly appeared in a hall on top of Pear Hill. Yan sat in the pavilion on the left side of the hall. Jeffrey's voice buzzed in her ears and she had half a mind to go and join everyone on the Jadeite platform even if the snake goddess had yet to summon her. Brother, Yan called out when she saw Zen's avatar. Would you like to join us? He asked. Yes, of course, she replied with no hesitation. In the fairy palace, another one of Zen's avatars appeared in Letitia's room. His sudden appearance surprised her but she remained calm. With her cultivation base, it was hard for her to tell whether it was truly Zen or just his avatar. Nonetheless, Letitia gave him a gentle smile. It seems that time is running out, huh? Yes, he nodded. Just as he was about to apologize, Letitia held a finger to his lips and shushed him. You didn't do anything wrong. And with that, Zen simply pulled her close and held her in his arms. In a courtyard of the fairy palace, Margaret was currently placing some books in front of Salome. The young girl was extremely intelligent and could already read, so Margaret thought it best to borrow some books from the library for her. In the midst of their study session, Zen's avatar quietly condensed and stared at her and Salome. His appearance went unnoticed as Margaret was too busy sorting the books out. Salome, however, noticed him and called out to her father. Margaret stiffened and when she turned around, her eyes were already red with tears. She had heard Zen's announcement. She was no fool, she completely understood the current situation they were all in. Unlike Letitia, however, Margaret was afraid of death and couldn't handle this calmly. Wah, wah. With a loud sob, Margaret ran to Zen's avatar and collapsed in his arms. Salome hasn't even grown up yet. She's innocent, she hasn't seen much of the world. Can you protect her and let her live on? Her words stabbed a metaphorical blade onto Zen's heart, but he shook his head. I'm sorry. What if you send her to the chaos? Margaret asked again. Not even the chaos will let her escape this disaster, he told her. What about the abstruse energy world? Salome could live there, right? Why not send her there? Margaret insisted, not willing to give up just yet. She had heard of that magical world and knew her daughter was talented, so maybe she could live there. She had no idea of the situation in the abstruse energy world, but she didn't care. All she wanted was for her daughter to live on. She won't be able to escape this disaster there either, Zen said, shaking his head once again. Not understanding what was happening, Salome simply looked on at her parents and behaved well. She had read many books, but her time in this world was too short. Of course, she knew life and death, but did not really have a good grasp of what those two concepts truly meant. Why? Margaret continued to wail. Another avatar also appeared in Aura's room. Zen wasn't the only one to say his final goodbyes to his family. The snake goddess, Fuxi, and the other Eternal Realm warriors did the same thing. Some bade farewell to their loved ones, while others felt the need to inform their inner worlds of their imminent destruction. In the cloud of probability extreme form, Zen had transformed into 1,000 avatars that launched more than 10,000 sword strikes towards the downgrader. Despite the attacks, the downgrader did not even bother summoning his avatars to dodge. More than 10,000 long swords came at him as he floated in the air, all of them transformed from the destruction extreme form. Boom, 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 boom. There was a flash of violet as the purple sword radiance drew over 10,000 paths in the air in an effort to slash at the downgrader. The power Zen released at that moment should have been enough to tear his enemy to shreds and even disintegrate him. However, the downgrader remained completely unharmed. In fact, a strong aura of life continued to emanate from his body as he activated the life extreme form. Of course, that alone was not the reason as to why he was able to withstand Zen's attack. In truth, an infinite energy of the life extreme form was gathered in his body. Any damage dealt to him was repaired at an imperceptible speed. That was why such a miraculous scene was delivered. Chapter 3877, A Strange State. Again, Zen roared, and over 1,000 avatars appeared at his command again. The avatars formed a circle while overlapping with each other and violently slashed the downgrader. 10,000 sword strikes, 30,000 sword strikes, 100,000 sword strikes. Despite their all-out attack, the downgrader still emerged unharmed. I might have overestimated you, he sneered. After all, you are not even a member of the cinnabar race or the fostering race in the 5th grade world. You don't have that many chances to use the extreme form energies, he commented with a sly smile as if nothing happened. After he finished speaking, he suddenly raised his hand and the irregular heavy sword emitted a blinding orange light. Splash! An orange ring of light then started to spread out from the irregular heavy sword. When the orange ring of light passed through Zen's avatars who surrounded the downgrader, they instantly evaporated into beams of light and disappeared without a trace. Only the real Zen was left. You may not be convinced, but I can easily kill you even without using the infinite energy. Buzz! The irregular heavy sword flashed with different colors this time. In an instant, massive amounts of extreme form energies were unleashed from each of its cracks. When Zen saw the irregular heavy sword flashing, he became distracted. The soul extreme form, Zen uttered as he recognized it. However, the downgrader did not intend to use the soul extreme form to create an illusion and control Zen. He only wanted to divert Zen's attention. Taking advantage of this opportunity, he rushed towards Zen as he dragged the irregular heavy sword. He pulled it up afterward, creating huge sword radiance. Bang! Without hesitation, Zen swung his purple sword at the irregular heavy sword. He had immediately blocked himself from the attack of the heavy irregular sword. However, an invisible force passed through Zen, splitting the cloud in half, which forced Zen to withdraw from the probability extreme form. What? Zen's heart skipped a beat. With a gentle pinch of his hand, he bolted away from the downgrader through the hyperspace extreme form. However, the downgrader didn't let Zen get away. He went after him with a much faster speed. Before Zen could leave, the irregular heavy sword cut through the distorted space and drew an arc in the air, slitting down towards his head. Crack, crack, crack. The irregular heavy sword sheared down Zen's head, mimicking a sound of rotten wood being chopped down. Zen's entire body began to twist, transforming into a strange kind of wood. The wood grew rapidly and entangled the downgrader. At this point, the downgrader was unable to break free as he was firmly planted in place. The light in his 6 pairs of compound eyes then dissipated, while the extreme form energies that flickered in the cracks of the irregular heavy sword gradually faded out. It is the energy-devouring wood. A part of the downgrader's mouth had been shut by coiled branches. It was a bit difficult for him to speak or even mutter a few words. The energy-devouring wood was a product of the combination of the life extreme form and another extreme form. It had once been popular in the deep space. The Cinnabar race had even created a forest full of energy-devouring wood to impede the attacks of the fostering race. The downgrader didn't expect Zen to employ the energy-devouring wood at all. He had accidentally been trapped by the energy-devouring wood, which absorbed all the extreme form energies from his body. I don't even know what kind of wood it is. I only know that it can trap and kill you. Zen's eyes flared with a mix of colors. By the looks of it, 2 kinds of extreme form energies had been heavily accumulating. The purple color was the destruction extreme form. The white one was the doubling extreme form. The destruction extreme form turned into a huge arrow that dragged a blazing purple flame behind, while the doubling extreme form formed both large and small white rings of light that extended from Zen all the way to the downgrader. The destruction extreme form was the most destructive of the 140 kinds of extreme form energies, and its power was multiplied by the doubling extreme form. The long arrow traveled fiercely across the small and large rings of light and shot the body of the downgrader. Splash! The sky suddenly lit up with what appeared as a huge firework. The purple flame was, in fact, more than 10,000 miles long. Any target that was hit would undoubtedly die, yet no trace of joy reflected on Zen's face. The downgrader had changed the infinite energy into a limited one, which gave Zen a chance to counterattack. However, he didn't think that he would kill the downgrader just like that. His trump card could at most save him some pride. Crack, 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 a round of applause came from behind. As expected, the downgrader reappeared. You have already figured out these methods not long after you brought back the heavenly ring staff. I underestimated you. Unfortunately, you still don't stand a chance. Go to hell. The downgrader reached out his hand and swept towards Zen. His energy was boosting to infinity again. Infinity meant that he was absolutely powerful and unparalleled, and no one could resist him. But Zen suddenly disappeared. He was still the master of the burial land after all. He didn't need to use the hyperspace extreme form, the grand teleportation, or construct a space channel to appear anywhere. The reason he activated the hyperspace extreme form now was to trick the downgrader. Seeing Zen disappear without warning, the downgrader said indifferently, playing hide and seek is useless. This world is too small, and you have nowhere to escape. The probability extreme form. Boom, a thick black cloud then started to disperse. The downgrader created a huge cloud that could fill the entire burial land. It was made up of countless smaller clouds. As he stood beneath the huge cloud, Zen reacted quickly and turned into 1,000 avatars who scattered in all directions. It was hard for the downgrader to find the real Zen now. But after a few moments, Zen became desperate as he was struck with a realization. Since there were 1,000 avatars in a cloud, countless avatars should also appear in countless clouds. In Zen's eyes, numerous downgraders filled every corner of the burial land as well. There was no way for over 1,000 avatars of Zen to escape. All of them were instantly killed by the downgrader. This is your primitive land, and you can safely revive even if you die. But how many times are you able to do so? The downgrader asked condescendingly. He didn't withdraw the clouds or his avatars and quietly waited for Zen to come back to life. Meanwhile, countless fragments of different sizes scattered from the broken source world. There was a body embedded in the crack of a rock with a diameter of 300 miles. It was a huge hyena. When the source world was destroyed by the needle, it was feasting on its prey. An unimaginable force swept down from above and split its head from its body. It was expected to die shortly as it had been beheaded. Compared to the creatures that had been sacrificed in the source world and didn't even have traces of their corpses left, this hyena was already lucky. What was luckier was it was still breathing. With unexpected consciousness, it saw the neat cut on its neck after its head was severed from its body. It could even give an order to its body and get it out of that crack. 2 hours later, it was still alive. 4 hours later, it was still alive. 10 hours later, it felt a little hungry as its stomach began to rumble. Its head controlled its body to grab the dead roe deer nearby. It then directed it to stuff the deer into its mouth, and then gobbled it ravenously with its sharp teeth. Although the hyena wasn't very intelligent, it had a feeling that this was the strangest way of eating. It continued to chew and swallow the flesh it devoured until it felt its stomach becoming full. This was what confused it the most. It seemed that its head and body remained intact in a very incomprehensible way. Chapter 3878, The Method of Restriction. Such a kind of odd thing was happening across the source world. Severed body parts lay scattered across the devastated area of the Bloom Divine Province. Some citizens were lucky enough to survive with limbs still attached, but they were broken, all the same. Those who had lost limbs, however, didn't feel any pain. In fact, they found they could still control their severed body parts just like the hyena could. An old man's body had been halved from the waist, but he could still feel his legs. When he controlled his legs to walk, he could see the severed limbs moving in the distance. Cries of horror and confusion began to break out. We must have been cursed. How can we still be alive? The remaining creatures in the source world wailed, aghast at their condition. Whereas before, they could look to the other shore for the answers to some mysteries, this was completely unprecedented. Meanwhile, the province where the evil god was located had also been decimated by the needle, the black hole reduced to rubble. When the huge needle fell down from above the source world, its gargantuan size flattened the province evenly. Most of the Holy Soul Realm warriors and Eternal Realm warriors in the black hole survived, however. They began to scramble out of the ruins. Only one Holy Soul Realm warrior was killed and 3 were injured. The source world has been destroyed, but we are still alive. Is it finally over? A Holy Soul Realm warrior asked. The Eternal Realm warrior next to him scoffed. Dream on. In the past, at the end of a chaotic era, it wasn't the needle that killed people. The needle only broke the source world. Now, we're actually in the chaos and no longer under any protection of the source world. When that last thunder rolls again, we're doomed. An air of gloom descended over them. He was correct. The source world had been destroyed and could no longer protect them. Just then, a Holy Soul Realm warrior not far away began sputtering loudly, "Look! What a strange phenomenon!" He was one of the 3 injured Holy Soul Realm warriors. One of his arms had been severed and lay hundreds of feet away from him. What phenomenon? An Eternal Realm warrior asked. The injured Holy Soul Realm warrior pointed at his arm in the distance. My arm is still connected to me. What nonsense are you talking about? It's true. Take a closer look if you don't believe me. The injured Holy Soul Realm warrior concentrated on moving the severed arm. The severed arm indeed began to flex its fingers. However, the arm was a long way away from the warrior's body. What a basic trick. How can you goof around at a time like this? The Eternal Realm warrior said, exasperated. With their cultivation base and strength, it was too easy for them to make objects move with their mind. The injured Holy Soul Realm warrior remained adamant. I'm not playing around. I'm telling the truth. I don't feel the injury at all. It's like that arm is still attached to me. The warrior struggled to explain his condition. Just then, another Eternal Realm warrior piped up. Actually, I've also been sensing something anomalous. Anomalous? How so? If you release your spiritual sense, you will know that. The entire landscape appears to be destroyed, but my spiritual sense shows me otherwise. It's like this is all an illusion, the Eternal Realm warrior said. The other Eternal Realm warriors and the Holy Soul Realm warriors hurriedly tapped into their spiritual senses then. A sense of unease came over them as they saw the anomaly for themselves. Some of the Eternal Realm warriors used the grand teleportation technique to get around the broken landscape to confirm what they were seeing. Rocks, mountains, and trees all seemed crushed to the naked eye and touch, but they remained fully intact under the lens of the spiritual senses. The dissonance was disorienting. High up in the sky, Duran and the Grand Master of Heaven hovered side by side, observing matters. The 2 of them had keen senses and had already detected the abnormality in the source world much earlier. Everything in this world appears destroyed, but everything is actually intact. There must be some force behind this. What do you think, Master Duran? The Grand Master of Heaven himself was stumped. It must be related to the evil god somehow. He would probably know, said Duran. He disappeared without a trace the instant the needle descended. Even his avatars are gone. I don't know what he's planning, the Grand Master of Heaven grumbled. He was really hoping the evil god didn't escape. He knew that everyone, including the evil god, couldn't escape after the source world was destroyed. I'm figuring out how to restore the source world. The voice of the evil god suddenly rang out around them. Duran and the Grand Master of Heaven watched as the real evil god slowly materialized in the distance. That would be impossible, the Grand Master of Heaven scoffed, shaking his head. The source world has already fallen. You would have lost the power of the primitive land along with it, reminded Duran. The source world, the burial land, and Zen's primitive land all got a portion of separate space from the chaos. When one collapsed, the invisible boundaries would disappear, and the space would merge with the chaos. Duran and the Grand Master of Heaven, of course, assumed the evil god was no longer the controller of the source world because the source world no longer existed. The corners of the evil god's mouth curled up. That's where you're wrong. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Blue light beams flickered behind him. The evil god's avatars appeared one after another until tens of thousands of them hovered in the air. What? The Grand Master of Heaven could only gawk in shock. You haven't lost the power of the source world, Duran exclaimed. Because the source world hasn't collapsed, the real evil god said with a faint smile. How could you say that? The Grand Master of Heaven pointed at the horizon, where a huge crack merged desolately with the chaos. It is not what it seems, the evil god said dismissively. Watch. The evil god stretched out his hand. With a flick of his wrist, pieces of the broken landscape began to move. Pebbles gathered together until they reformed into boulders. Trees, mountains, rivers all returned smoothly to their original state. Everything within 100 miles were restored to their previous condition. The ruins had all disappeared. It was as if the needle had missed the area. The Grand Master of Heaven could hardly believe it. How did you do that? That's astounding, he gasped. I activated the restriction field as the needle shot towards the source world. It can resist any hit, protecting everything therein, the evil god replied. That's amazing, Duran exclaimed. Doing so, I discovered something new about the restriction field, the evil god went on, motioning to the distance. After being hit by the needle, many fragments of the source world erupted into the chaos. Those materials are still within the restriction field. What does that mean? The Grand Master of Heaven asked. It means that the further those fragments go, the bigger the source world would be, the evil god replied. Chapter 3879, Enclosure. This was a result that surprised even the evil god. The restriction field allowed all living beings and materials in the source world to remain their original form, including the form of the source world itself. So, you mean the source world can now be expanded at will? The Grand Master of Heaven asked with a trembling voice. If that was the case, expanding the source world would become extremely simple. All they had to do was take its fragments out so that the fragments could either fly or be transported as far away from the source world as possible. Yes, the evil god nodded affirmatively with hopeful eyes. Then I've already sent out my avatars to try to expand the source world, but I still don't know if the restriction field could expand indefinitely, said the evil god, interrupting what the Grand Master of Heaven was about to say. After the source world had been smashed into pieces, the broken fragments gathered together and formed a long oval belt instead. Thousands of giant rocks floated at the frontmost portion of the belt. Above these rocks were all sorts of creatures and vicious beasts, including snakes, insects, ants, and even ancient beasts. Despite the drastic change, they had all managed to be peaceful. Even in the face of disaster and destruction, these creatures and beasts remained calm. They only wanted to survive and did nothing more or less than that. However, even the smartest beasts did not understand what had really happened. They could only curl up and stay cozy in their small caves, looking into the endless void. At this moment, one of the beasts suddenly began to shiver. This tall and powerful beast shook as its body started to shrink into a smaller size that later turned into an avatar of the evil god. The avatar looked around and fixed his gaze on a triangular rock about 10 feet wide. He observed that this rock was very suitable for making a boundary. I'll choose you. The evil god flew over and grabbed the bottom part of the triangular rock with one hand. Because of the powerful aura of the evil god, the creatures that gathered on the triangular rock scrambled to different directions in fear. However, a python drilled deep into the triangular rock. This was its cave. After the evil god lifted the rock in his hand, his fingertips flashed with the power of the hyperspace extreme form. With a gentle pinch of his fingers, the two spaces were connected into one while he had already crossed a long distance with that triangular rock. 30 trillion miles. There seems to be no change in the restriction field at all. Can it hold on? The evil god's avatar asked himself hesitantly. Others couldn't perceive the existence of the restriction field, but the evil god could clearly observe it. It was clear as day from his eyes. At the edge of the debris belt of the source world, a blue light band floated, which extended to the farthest material. Now that the evil god's avatar had moved the triangular rock 30 trillion miles away, the blue light band had also extended by 30 trillion miles. As soon as the evil god's avatar finished speaking, he glanced at the light band in the distance that had stretched out horizontally by 30 trillion miles. He recognized another avatar who was carrying out the task as well. The real evil god had sent out a total of 8 avatars to expand the source world in 8 directions. Buzz. Just then, the real evil god suddenly appeared in front of the avatar without warning. This space now belonged to the source world after it had been enclosed by the restriction field. He no longer needed to use any space theurgy to appear anywhere. There are no pressure on the restriction field. It should be able to extend infinitely. Now, take this stone to the edge of the chaos, the real evil god ordered. Yes, the avatar responded obediently. The avatars that the evil god created also had their own consciousness. However, when he created the avatars, he had placed extremely fearsome memories into their minds, which made them believe that he was indeed undefeatable. Only then did these avatars learn to behave. Although there were still some avatars who made trouble in secret, they became much better than before. The real evil god didn't worry himself too much about them. Swoosh! The avatar went away in an instant with the triangular rock in his hand and proceeded with the enclosure. The poor python that had entered the triangular rock was also brought far away. In just a few minutes, the area under the actual control of the source world had already expanded by over 100 times. This was a huge space that the real evil god had never imagined before. His ambition was to directly expand it to the entire chaos, and now his plan was slowly falling into place. One of the avatars flew down to the east and came across a lone pyramid floating in the void. The burial land. The avatar flew past it while still contemplating about it. It was the burial land that planned to destroy the worlds. After the source world had been broken by the needle, its next goal would definitely be Zen's primitive land. But now, the avatar could only see the burial land while Zen's primitive land had mysteriously disappeared. What happened? Although he was very curious, he did not stop to find the answer to his question. He was reminded that he only needed to complete the task assigned by the real evil god. Otherwise, he would be blamed. As the avatar included the burial land in his enclosure, the real evil god sensed it with his omniscient power. He then informed the Grand Master of Heaven and Duran, "We've found the burial land." The two men's eyes suddenly lit up. The Grand Master of Heaven eagerly asked, "Are you going to attack him?" To him, the field that the evil god had comprehended was too miraculous. After making the burial land part of the source world, he would certainly take revenge, and there was no doubt about it. "It's not the time yet." The evil god shook his head unexpectedly. "Why?" asked Duran, confused with the evil god's answer. "Energy," the evil god said with a frown. "The energy I have is very limited compared to them. They don't have this problem." Previously, when the downgrader, Zen, and he used the in and out holes to strike attacks against one another, he had only suffered a great loss. His energy was evidently insufficient, so he could only constantly sacrifice the materials of the source world at the time. "I'm afraid there's no solution to this problem," said Duran. "Zen has endless energy, all thanks to the ancestry-level bloodline, while you can't obtain that ancestry-level bloodline, so..." He paused as he saw the look on evil god's face. He didn't mean to question him at all. The talent that the evil god displayed had gone beyond his imagination. Even in the Four Spirits sect, there was no such highly talented person. However, some things couldn't be solved by mere intelligence, such as the problem of infinite energy. The evil god smiled faintly and turned to look at the tens of thousands of avatars at a distance. "The rules of the fields are very clear to me. There are a total of 86 kinds. As long as I deduct according to the rules of the restriction field, I will soon be able to restore all the fields. If you comprehend all the fields, your might will be doubled. But you can't release even extreme form energies infinitely. The energy consumed by the fields is surely more unimaginable," the Grand Master of Heaven said, also worrying about the energy. "You're right," the evil god nodded in agreement. "Restoring energy is like sharpening a knife. No matter how sharp a knife is, in the end, it's only a tool. It's useless if one does not have the strength to use it." With these words, he stared at the void with sharp eyes. He then clenched one hand in the air, and energy started to rotate from his closed fist like a dancing elf. "If I want to become a person who uses the tool, I must know what the most essential energy is. The fields are not the end. I master not only the rules of restoring the fields but also the rules of restoring the essence." Chapter 3880, Memories. Inside the burial land, the cloud of probability extreme form continued to stretch over the surface, covering it completely. The figures of the downgrader came into sight and then left over and over again. In less than a minute, tens of billions of avatars appeared, only to disappear, leaving without a trace. The number was meaningless when it came to infinity. Over 1,000 Zen's avatars in the cloud were killed. His real body was sliced into smaller parts and scattered around the burial land. Despite this, Zen's ancestry-level bloodline, consciousness, and extreme form energies were still alive, pushing through the tragedy that had just happened. Buzz. With all that was left of his power and strength, Zen called his scattered body parts to come together and waited as it took shape. However, before he could regain his balance, an uncountable number of the Downgrader's avatars came to surround him. Go to hell, the Downgrader's avatars said, launching palm strikes towards Zen. Zen knew palm strikes were not very great in power. They weren't even strong enough to kill an Eternal Realm warrior. What worried him was the number of avatars aiming the strikes at him at the same time. Enduring one strike was possible, but to endure tens of billions of strikes at the same time was a different ball game. For all he knew, they could have the power to burn him into ashes in the blink of an eye. In the primitive land, I would not die, Zen thought to himself. Even if his original body was broken, it would still remain inside the burial land. However, as soon as his parts began to morph into his original body, what was always waiting for him were the Downgrader's avatars, ready to attack him with great intensity. 5 times, 10 times, 50 times, 100 times. He had barely stitched his body parts back together, and the avatars were already breaking it down. It would be impossible for him to fight back. You're becoming desperate, Zen. I can feel it, the Downgrader said. I was generous enough to give you every chance to surrender, but you're too hard-headed. You still refused. Now, there's no time for regret. You'd better use the only time you have left to say goodbye to this world. Buzz. At the foot of a mountain reaching the heavens, Zen's body continued to condense. However, just as his body began to regain shape, the Downgrader's avatars appeared before him again. In a split second, the giant mountain and Zen were smashed into fine powder. Regardless, Zen wasn't ready to quit. He quickly began to think of other places where he could continue condensing into his original form. However, just as he was doing this, he heard a voice call to him. It was the voice of the ancestry-level bloodline. Zen, stop, it pleaded, sounding very concerned. What's wrong? Zen asked. Don't do useless things, the ancestry-level bloodline replied, which irritated Zen. What do you even mean? Are you saying I shouldn't do anything about this? Zen asked with anger present in his voice. In the past, he had been face to face with a large number of strong and powerful opponents. For the first time in his life, he had felt so weak. As the troubled creatures were inching closer and closer to the Pear Hill, he knew everything would be destroyed. Everything he had done was going to be for nothing. The thought that he couldn't even do anything about it frustrated him greatly. The opponent he was facing now was just too powerful to be defeated. He was busy in his thoughts when the ancestry-level bloodline began to speak again, catching his attention. I've found Clarence's memories, it said. What did you say? Zen asked, not being sure if he had heard right. When the heavenly ring staff was brought back, the ancestry-level bloodline was certain its memories were stored in the crystal, but it had never been able to understand the crystal. Just a few moments back, Zen's physical body had been crushed into pieces by the Downgrader. His body parts, as well as the crystal, merged into the burial land. Then, unexpectedly, the memories inside the crystal flowed out. You shall inherit Clarence's memories, the ancestry-level bloodline said. Why? Zen asked, furrowing his brows in confusion. I'm just a wisp of intelligence from the ancestry-level bloodline. I'm not a part of Clarence. You're more suitable for this, it replied. Before Zen could ask more questions or refuse, he felt a sharp pain from the back of his brain. Arg! He screamed in pain. All of a sudden, endless memories came flooding in, reaching even the deepest parts of his soul. Boom! After the sharp pain was gone, things returned to normal. He was back in his own consciousness again. After this, he noticed that in front of him lay a pure, blank space. There was absolutely nothing in it, but for some reason, it didn't make him feel empty. Ironically, it gave him a sense of satisfaction. Where am I? Zen couldn't help but ask, taking in his new environment. You're in the perfect land, an unfamiliar voice answered. The perfect land, but there is nothing in here. How can this be perfect? He asked, confused but curious. There was nothing in the world that was absolutely perfect, especially considering that everyone had a different definition of perfection. What was perfect for one person could be imperfect to another. But as Zen spoke, his voice caused countless ripples to appear in the space. The ripples began to fill the space, and suddenly, the area began to transform. The sky became pure blue. Courtyard walls rose from the ground which was paved with cyan-colored bricks. A group of laughing children ran along the corridor, followed by the adults scolding them for running. The walls looked similar to those of the fairy palace but even more like those of the Luo clan's old mansion. The laughing children were very much like younger versions of Letitia, Margaret, and the others. Standing in the courtyard, Zen felt a sense of peace and contentment in his heart. He had no idea how he managed to do it, especially so easily, but he was very happy to have built such a world. This is your perfect land. The space you saw just now is my perfect land, the voice said. Yes, a world that corresponds to all perfection, Zen exclaimed. You're right, the voice said, becoming low. But everything has been destroyed. Rumble. The blue sky was overcast with dark, gray clouds. The courtyards collapsed one after another like dominoes. The brick road was blown away by the strong wind, and the children fell to the ground, covered in their own blood. Darkness fell upon the land, devouring it completely. Although Zen knew what he was seeing was not real, he could not help the sinking feeling in his heart. He was unable to suppress his anger, questioning the voice. Why did you destroy this world? He screamed. I destroyed it because of him, the voice said. Because of whom? Zen asked. I call him Mastma, but I believe you know him as the downgrader, the voice answered. If this was your perfect land, why was Mastma here? Zen asked. He was a wisp of my consciousness. I created him, the voice replied. Zen began to feel his blood boil even more. Then why did you create him? He said, raising his voice. At that time, I thought the only perfect world was an imperfect one. This was why I created Mastma. He was necessary for breaking the perfection I created, but I didn't expect things to reach a point that I couldn't handle anymore. I didn't plan for him to be so powerful. After the voice said this, a black dot appeared and began to expand. It expanded like a bubble, bigger and bigger until eventually, it popped. It broke into 4 pieces, which were all connected, forming a giant trapezoid. This should be the boundless shock world, Zen thought to himself. Jeffrey had told him before what happened in the levitation tower. Because of this, he had a general understanding of the worlds of all grades. The perfect land I was just in must be the boundless perfect world. Jeffrey has never been there before, he thought to himself. The trapezoid continued to collapse, turning into rectangular pieces. When the pieces gathered together again, it turned into an even larger trapezoid. This was the boundless secondary world. When this collapsed, the boundless void world appeared. And when this collapsed, another world came to view. A total of 9 worlds appeared and collapsed. In the end, the stellar world appeared, specifically the deep space. Most of its parts had collapsed. I realized too late that Mastma would destroy everything. I did my best to chase him down and kill him. However, from the 12th grade world to the 5th grade world, I failed completely, the voice said, sad and full of remorse. It was much easier to destroy than to create. The downgrader wouldn't stop just like that, especially when he had already begun the downgrade.